and the best 2.5-year-old buck on the property steps out. I mean, the one that's got a chance of going somewhere,
Yeah.
And I was hunting with my dad, and I knew right then, that deer is dead.
He's dead.
He is dying right now. And my dad wouldn't even wait for him to turn broadside. He shot him right here and dropped him like a rock.
HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, we've been using Deer Grow products for a long time. The Plot Start and Plot Boost, more recently Plot Till. Now we've got 3 new liquid fertilizers that have been put in the mix that will cover everything we could want for a food plot program.
It's huge, man. The more food plotting we do, it's like, man, the liquids just make sense. Like whether it's herbicides or the Plot Start and Plot Boost, and now the fertilizers getting mixed in. It's like, man, I can combine all of those in certain cases and do less passes for more results.
I mean, it's all about efficiency. I mean, like you said, less passes. If you're out there treating your beans with glyphosate in the summertime, you can mix in this fertilizer, do that all at once. You have the boost in there to help some metabolism. It's all about efficiency when we're talking about food plots. And really the big difference on these liquid fertilizers is you're bypassing some of these soil limitations, pH limitations, the soil type. In a lot of cases, we talk about dry fertilizers only being available for 17% of what you put down in the first year. These liquid fertilizers straight into the plant are 90% available in the first year. Huge difference in what you're going to see in growth.
It's huge. And so right now you can use code HUNTR15 for 15% off any of the Deer Grow products on their website. And as always,
better food plots, bigger deer. And we're back.
Ew.
HUNTR Podcast, episode 209, as Nick keeps us in line.
Niner.
Just so everybody understands, we do go back and forth of like, what number are we on? Nick keeps us in line, 209.
Yeah, appreciate that, Nick.
You said Thursday, too. So if you're listening to this on the day it dropped, it's probably October 10th. Crazy.
Well, they're flying by, and we have just, I would say, pretty quickly adapted to 2 a week here. So
2 a week.
Yeah, we're
double duty,
rocking and rolling. So, hey, wherever you guys are coming to us from, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or as of recently, we're on iHeartRadio too. I put the thing on there. We appreciate you guys being here. Give us a like, follow, or subscribe, whatever's appropriate for the channel. We appreciate you guys following along. One of those will give you a notification when these episodes drop, but they are 6 p.m. Eastern time every Tuesday and Thursday night. If you've written us on Instagram DM or the website, info@wearehunter.com, those are the 2 that we try to keep up with the most. We are, I told Nick, we're behind a bit, but
we're getting there.
Yeah, at some point here, we hope to direct you back on that. And we appreciate you guys taking the time to reach out to us. So that's pretty cool. Last but not least, we have some merch. Jeremy's wearing a hat or a shirt. I
am wearing a hat.
How about that? We've got some cool stuff here. So if you want some of that, you can check it out on the We Are Hunter website. We appreciate you guys supporting us in that way. And here we go. We said it's October 10th. We're shooting this on the 1st of October. It is go time. It's happened. It's here, as they say.
It is here. So, yeah, you blink and you're listening to this, it's October 10th. You just missed 10 days of October.
Didn't it feel it's kind of like, everybody stay calm?
Yeah.
Because I want to freak out too and just drop everything and go hunt. But
we were just going over our schedule pre-podcast, and it's like, before we know it, we're saying, okay, well, like, what about that week before Thanksgiving? And it's like, what? But
yeah. Well, dude, the days are so like, we've done it before where you break down a calendar. You're like, okay, well, you got all of October and all of November. It's like, your prime bow hunting months, excluding the late season and stuff. Okay, so what do you got? 60 days here. Well, okay, but obviously work, family, schedule. Okay, so how many free days can we carve out of that time? Okay, cool. So we break it down to like maybe half 30, 40, right? If we maximize it. Okay, and then but weather dependent, especially October, and even November, latter part. Okay, so whittle it down to like, all right, what do we have now? There 15, 20, days, like even at a maximum, and you're like, am I really going to hunt 15? And all of a sudden, you and I are like, well, scheduling conflicts. If we want to hunt together, okay, now these schedules have to align with one another, and it's just like, man,
it's a handful of days at the end.
They're precious, and we're gonna have to make some sacrifice on both ends here too. More on mine because you got kids, and I want to accommodate that too. So
yeah, I mean, it just boils down. There's a handful of days. I mean, especially when we get into that last part of October and the first week or 2 in November, it's like usually there's a cold front coming through. If you're hunting from Iowa to Pennsylvania, like it is good 1 or 2 days, like back to back for that whole time. And it's like, you can only be in one place at a time.
So it's like, sure, you're hunting the cold front and it's great in Illinois. Tomorrow it's great in Ohio, and you're probably not going to get there in time.
Yeah.
So it's just, you have to, try to pull that into your strategy.
It's okay. Yeah.
Nobody freak out.
And that's where the nobody freak out comes out, because you could, that's stressful to want to be in more than place at a time. But I think the trick is just to be present, to be, in the season and where you're at. You can't be more than 2 places at once. So just optimize your time in the places where, you want to be and where your odds of success are high, and with the people, more importantly, that you want to be.
Yeah, just enjoy it.
With. So
that's what it really comes down to, is just don't get yourself worked up. They're just deer. Just try to enjoy it.
They are just deer at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I
took Harlan squirrel hunting the other day.
Lesson.
Normally that's like a no-no. I'm like, I'm not, we're so close to the season. I don't want to mess anything up. I'm like, let's just go shoot a bunch of squirrels. Of course, I didn't see it. We saw one. We didn't get shot at it. Saw 5 deer and 1 squirrel, of course.
Who cares? Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just, it is. Just enjoy it. So, anyways, we've got a cool guest today.
A very cool one.
So we've got Dr. Grant Woods on, which Grant and I have known each other for a long time. I'll give him credit. He's one of the guys that, as I was coming through the ranks in school and stuff, I looked up to as like, here's this guy who's really taken his background and biology and his passion for deer and been able to make an entire career of this. Not to mention, one of the first guys to come out from an internet show type of front back in the day with growingdeer.tv, which is still around, obviously. But like that, immediately changed what I think from a hunting media or hunting show aspect of things. There's a huge change, huge player, something that we had never experienced before, and probably brought a lot of people into the management aspect of land and wildlife that may have never thought about it previously.
Yeah.
So, huge change there.
It was definitely one of the biggest, whatever you would say, factors that molded or impacted me. So I was in college at the time when I can't remember when he started it necessarily, but that was when I first started really paying attention to those international. So it was Growing Deer and it was Midwest Whitetail. The two would drop like on a weekly or throughout the week basis. And those were the two that I remember skipping class and for whatever reason, I was doing my QDMA Deer Steward one. I think to work for you, Steve was like, "Hey, you need to get that," And, and so I was like, "Okay." So I was studying for this, and so I started getting into these web series and stuff, and I was just became really, a fan of those models and of those guys. So Grant and like I said, along with the Midwest, those two were some major influencers for me coming up to shaping me into a deer hunter, I think, and a land manager for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, huge honor to have Grant on and get to talking of where he's come up through and, hopefully just kind of dabble throughout. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this know who Grant is, have seen the show. But obviously we like to use this opportunity to kind of get to dig a little deeper and understand kind of what drives a person and where Grant's at today. And let's bring him in. All right. We got you, Grant?
Got me.
All right, sir. We appreciate you jumping on this morning. Still in Missouri, right?
I'm still in Missouri, by Branson, Missouri, southwest corner, not the deer mecca of the world, not the deer mecca of northern Missouri.
Well, I mean, for obviously we talked about it a little bit there in the opening. I mean, for a lot of people, there were a lot of eyes on that area and specifically on your farm as we kind of followed Growing Deer through the years and taking, to what most people would come to understand, not necessarily a great deer hunting property and really, trying to work and turn it into the best that it could possibly be.
It was a really fun journey. We're still doing it. But it didn't start that way. You mentioned Bill. Bill and I are friends, been friends forever. And Bill actually had started Midwest Whitetail. And we were talking one day, say, "Hey, why don't you kind of, be the biologist on here, come do a segment every now and then." And just because of writing, of course, outdoor articles used to be big. I wrote for a lot of magazines, and some companies were paying attention to me. And just people said, "Why don't you do your own thing?" And I talked to Bill. We're still friends. And so, I'm more of a manager. Bill's kills great big giant deer. So anyway, that's how Growing Deer started. I never bought this land as horrible, rocky, rough, steep terrain to prove to people you could do it. It was just a inexpensive land and a place to raise my family. So it all just kind of fell into place.
I remember that. Was he on growing deer at one point, or were you on Midwest, or maybe some of both?
Yeah, vice versa. We both have helped each other. Like I say, we're still friends.
Yeah.
I've had a really great role in the outdoor profession. I worked with the juries a bunch, close friends, and being more of a manager. I'm not a competitor with these guys.
Sure.
And so I've been able to be really close friends with what I call the big stud hunters, because I'm not competing with them. I'm a manager. I'm a scientist and a manager, and I like to help other people, whatever their goals are, achieve that on their land. So it's been really easy for me. I haven't had to really butt heads with many people or really compete for sponsors or anything like that. It's been a really easy path for me.
Yeah.
So Grant, just for a lot of our listeners and kind of how we like some of these, episodes to go, give us a little background. So where did you grow up at?
I was raised here in the area, and it's called the Ozarks. We're a little mountain range here called the Ozark Mountains. And my path is really cool and direct. When I was 6 years old, I was raised on a little small farm, a lot of rocks, and actually great wildlife habitat. We didn't know it. Herbicides were not a thing, so fields were weedy. Fence rows were really wide because you couldn't keep the saplings at bay except with an axe or a chainsaw. And a pile of rabbit and quail. And I wish I could remember this part, but I'd heard somewhere they're going to restock deer in the county. There were no deer in the county where I was raised. They had, of course, been wiped out back in the day. And Missouri Department of Conservation was doing a great job trapping a few deer and placed them in certain areas. But I don't know where. Barbershop, obviously I had hair back in the day or wherever. I heard they're going to put some deer in the area. And that just got in my brain like, oh my gosh, a deer, and I'd never seen a deer at this time. And one morning, I remember so clearly, it was right before Christmas break, and I'd finished my chores. My dad was still doing some stuff, and I had a trap line. I thought it was a big Yukon trapper. I had 3 little box traps we'd made out of scrap barn wood that I'd put around the edge of our Milo field or cornfield, whatever it was that year, to try to catch some rabbits. And I'd actually gotten pretty good at catching rabbits. So the new rule in the family was if you catch a rabbit, you can only keep it, because we had all the rabbits we need to eat. If you, kick the edge of the box, open the door, and the rabbit runs out, and I hit it. I had a homemade bow. And I don't ever remember hitting a rabbit, even though they'd run out 5 feet and stop. I don't ever remember hitting one. But one morning I was checking my trap line, and I found a female fawn in one of our little fields that had been shot in the head. First deer I ever saw had been poached. And ever since that day, I've been passionate about deer. I'm still that guy that, hits the rumble strip seeing a deer in the back of fields.
Oh, yeah.
I'm passionate about deer and really have a strong dislike for game law violators.
Sure.
Wow.
And so I didn't see another deer for many years, but I just kept that fire. And then on my 16th birthday, we had a farm. And at that time, we'd got rid of a lot of fence rows and converted a lot of it to hay. And you could see many, many acres, 80 acres from our back window, so to speak. And me and my buddies were hauling hay and come in to eat lunch. Mom had fixed us lunch. And on my 16th birthday at noon, hot noon, June 11th, hot noon, a doe ran across behind our house. And I've just had this sequence of events on special days or special times. God's put a deer in my life. And ever since then, deer just been good. So go to the local college, which had a biology program, not a deer program at all. That wasn't even a word back in the day. Just took everything I could wildlife related and thought I'd end up being a game warden, just something to work with deer, and had a real passion for it. And along the way, got some jobs, volunteer positions, not jobs, with the BLM, Bureau of Land Management out in Nevada, do a program that's still around today. I'll tell people about it that want to, get in this profession. It's called the Student Conservation Association, SCA. It's a great program, volunteer program to put young students typically with professionals in the field, kind of like an internship, see if they like it or whatever. And I got assigned to work with mule deer in the mountains of Nevada. Man, I thought I was in Africa or Alaskan safari. Again, Nevada was a long ways from Missouri, and we'd get in a helicopter and fly around. And that summer was a dry summer, and so there was fire everywhere. It's not like now with a lot of news media. I might, call my parents collect once a week back in the day from a cell phone booth, no cell phones, and let them know I was alive. What you been doing? Boy, we fought a 40,000 acre fire, whatever. They couldn't even believe it because there was no media. They had no idea what was going on. So it just opened up a bunch of world for me. And fortunately, I had a great boss that was a really good wildlife biologist. And of course, we were working with mule deer, but he took me under his wing, and we were studying winter mule deer habitat, which there weren't many deer in that time of year, but mule deer migrating and learning to identify those plants, and found a pile of sheds because, it's where they wintered. So found a pile of great big mule deer sheds and all that stuff. And so just along my career, I've, just been blessed to be in the right place, right time type stuff, and got into the University of Georgia, which is a powerhouse school like Mississippi State. Worked for Dr. Marchington and Dr. Miller. Still friends with those guys, and they were great wildlife biologists and pushed hard, like Harry Jacobson at Mississippi State or Damaris, and made you learn something, made you perform. Very thankful for that. And then went to Clemson, did my PhD under Dave Gwynn, Dr. Gwynn, another really good
I love
biologist.
Dave. Yep, him and Susan are great.
And so just a really good path. And along the way there at Clemson, hunting leases were really starting to dominate the Southeast, and timber companies and big leaseholders would call the school and say, hey, boy, we'd like to do a little bit more for deer. Deer management was not a huge term at the time. And a lot of times the school or the dean or insurance purposes or whatever couldn't do it. They'd say, hey, we got this graduate student that's really into deer. He'll probably help you. And I'd go help people for free. I just wanted to be a wildlife biologist. I wasn't consulting. I was volunteering and just really loving it, and, scratching off a few food plots or doing whatever. And one thing I'll share that I don't think a lot of people know, Harry Jacobson knows, and I hear him talk about it every now and then, but along the way, I was doing research on scrape behavior of deer, not near as much. The average, probably 10-year-old hunter knows more about scrapes than we knew back in the day, because we didn't have all the technology we have now. But I got invited to give a little presentation at a Safari Club International fundraiser. I'm a poor kid from the hills, and and I love Safari Club. They really helped my career, but they're all dressed to the nines, and the ladies all had golf balls on the ring finger and stuff like that. And I'm scared to death, man. Not like today. I had a sport coat on, a tie, and I gave my little 35 millimeter slideshow on what we were learning about scrapes, which was me sitting in trees, not a tree stand, a tree, with my notepad, trying to see a deer in a scrape, a wild free ranging deer on public land, and writing it down. And just sat down, scared to death. I'd said something wrong. This 10-year-old kid comes up to me and said, hey, my dad wants to talk to you in the hallway. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm getting called in the hall, man. I said something really offensive here. And this guy, his name was Bill Goodson, says, boy, I really like what you're doing. But those techniques are pretty crude. And I'm an infrared engineer. I'm the guy that patented police radar guns, whatever, stuff like that. And I developed this thing that will take pictures of deer in the woods. And I'd like to donate one to your research. I was like, really? Boy, that seems kind of like, SpaceX, it's like going to the moon. Well, that was the first trail camera. Jeez. And I was actually involved in patenting the first trail camera. And I didn't make any money. I didn't have any lawyers or anything like that. I was a guinea pig. And they were big and bulky, and they were passive, active infrared, where there's a sender and a receiver, and the deer had to break the beam. Of course, only 36 pictures. You didn't waste one. You didn't actually learn to trigger it because we had 36. And once a week, I'd drive, my research area was out in the boonies. I'd drive to town to the 1 hour photo mark. Man, I'd stand there, probably flirting with a little girl working there, waiting to get my pictures back to see, any picture of a deer was like, oh my gosh. And so that kind of helped my career too. We published those pictures and deer hunting back in the day or whatever. And this was all, it seems like, oh my gosh, but that was big stuff,
Oh, that's huge, man. It's so hard to look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, just along the way, certain things fell in place. And I think in hindsight, I mean, I personally believe God put me in those places, but in hindsight, I had so much passion.
Yeah.
You know how it is when you got really great passion, where you're learning to shoot a bow or whatever it is, and you're just not taking no. You make mistakes, but you're just not taking no.
Yeah.
And that was me going through school and trying to compete at big universities, because I'm not a rocket scientist. Carl Miller, I mean, Carl made a perfect on his GRE, literally one of the few people that ever made a perfect. Carl's brain is humongous and great guy, great friend.
Yep.
And trying to compete in that environment, I just wanted deer. I mean, I just wanted deer, give me more deer, something about deer.
Yeah.
And that passion is what pulled me through, and that work ethic and drive.
Yeah. I think that's the big thing. I mean, I remember, because I was not a Carl Miller when I was going through my, GREs and stuff. In fact, I think Steve Damaris probably thought like Spanish was my first language based on my verbal skills through that GRE test. But I mean, there was I remember vividly my professor at Penn State, Dr. San Julian, told me that I was just one stubborn son of a gun because I told him, I was like, I just want to work with deer. I was like, I don't know what I have to do. I don't know what job I have to take, but like, that's just what I want to work with. That's what I'm passionate about. And he's like, well, you better leave Pennsylvania and go to grad school somewhere and figure out, how to do it. And I think that passion really, I mean, anybody that's truly passionate about something will figure it out.
Sure.
They'll figure out how to make it work. They'll figure out how to get better at the things that they're not good at to make sure that everything works through and succeed. But yeah, it's a tough thing. And also the competition, for students who want to go into a grad school program, particularly around deer, it is unbelievably competitive.
Yeah, extremely competitive. And schools have changed. Like when I first was recruited at University of Georgia, I was blessed to be recruited to a couple of schools. I don't know why, just again, my passion, I guess, and writing a few things. But students today, a lot of those departments are shifting a little bit more non-game. Mississippi State's really great still, and a couple other schools. But there's even more competition for that money. It takes money to go through grad school because a lot of those funds have been diverted for non-game species or oil spills or whatever. So anyway, a lot of competition. It's a tough road.
Grant, where do you think that passion comes from for deer? Jeremy and I have kind of circled the conversation before, and we're like, you could look at experience and say, well, because you mentioned a few of them. You're like, oh, I saw that fawn, and that one that ran across at noon. And for Jeremy and I, we have similar. My uncle would take me out during dinner, and we would spotlight and stuff. But it seems like there is something more. Like it's like you're saying, it's either it's a God-given passion or it's in the DNA. It's like it's almost an inexplainable. And on the other side of it too, it's cool because it's like not in a braggadocious way, but it's just like I feel like I have won, like in the sense that it's like, man, I see a lot of people being successful with deer hunting and stuff, but I would rival my passion for deer and for deer hunting against anyone's. And not that it's a competition, but I'm like, that's what I want for everybody, is to be that passionate about deer.
I think a lot of it was our mentors or early experiences. I wish I still had this. I've tried to replicate it when my kids were young, couldn't find anything, Nerf guns or whatever, but I had a wind-up rabbit I'd gotten for Christmas. My family was hunters, again, rabbit and quail. My grandpa could kill 2 quail, not all the time, sometimes with a single shot on the rise. I mean, I'm not that coordinated, he was. So, I was raised with hunters. Hunting was important. It's just, in the fall, it's just what you did Sunday afternoons. You went and bust, and I was the dog, right? I'd get sent to fence row to flush a quail out for the older guys to shoot at. But I think mentors and just what's talked about at the dinner table or whatever, I think that's a big part of it. And then some of us just inherently, Bill Gates and computers or whatever, some of us just inherently are drawn to certain subjects or certain things, and they excel at that, whether that's, rock climbing or whatever it is. And I'm really attracted to people that excel at whatever they're into. I have no musical skills, but through my career, I've been able to work for some of the bigger names in the country music world. And man, the ones that aren't just doing it for money, that are really passionate about their music and their lyrics and the message they're communicating, man, they're fun to be around. And I'm not a music guy. I'll tell y'all a funny. 2 times I was one time I got a call, 400 acres outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and we go down there, and we're about halfway through the day, and we've been walking this guy's property. And of course, I'm prescribed or, do what we're doing. And then we come home right report. I said, well, I'd normally say, hey, man, what you do for a living? And I had a couple of interns with me, and they start snickering and laughing. I'm thinking, boy, I stepped into something here, And I don't think the guy minded me saying his name at all, but it was Red Atkins, pretty famous guy, been music writer of the year for bunches of years or whatever, and he starts hooting and laughing. And we finish the day, we go to Waffle House and get dinner, and we come home. He's just another guy that, likes to hunt and puts his pants on one leg at a time. And I've met several people like that. They're just really good people. And then another time, because I'm not socially smart, guy calls me in Kansas, and I knew him, and he's a Major League Baseball player, really well known. I won't say his name. And so I get out there, and I see him standing there, and this guy likes rodeo stuff. He's got his chaps on and whatnot, and I walk up there, and these are all pretty big guys. And, hey, Grant, why don't you meet my friend? This is so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And we get to the last so-and-so, I was like, Fred or whatever. Hey, Fred, good to meet you. And they all start hooting and laughing. And the main guy just slaps him on the back, says, "I told you Woods wouldn't know you." And apparently this guy had a big ego, and he just said before I got there, "Everybody knows me. Everyone knows me." And I didn't know the guy from Adam's House Cat, So
Yeah.
they use me a little bit there. But anyway,
That's funny,
I find
man.
that people that are really into deer, public land, private land, whatever, really into deer. I mean, like having a conversation like we are and have these fond memories. Man, it crosses all borders. I'm sure this is true in, golf or whatever, but it's not a financial border or I shoot this brand, you shoot that brand border. It's just a great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, to me, is a really nice fellowship, or as Wydell says, a brotherhood, a really nice fellowship of people that you can kind of count on, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think you brought it up kind of in your childhood, and Jared and I have talked, and it seems like if I'm trying to find a common denominator, and maybe you weren't like super passionate about it, but you mentioned trapping. And trapping seems to be, you start talking to more and more people that share the passion, and it's like, boy, everybody, had a phase of trapping in their life.
I think trappers were noble, right? I mean, those of us old enough to remember, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett stories, all that stuff, and coonskin hats and, the cool stuff. That was kind of a macho thing. And I still think good trappers are some of the best woodsmen out there.
Absolutely.
I mean, think about getting the Wile E. Coyote to step in a 2-inch circle, that's luck happens every now and then, but to do that repeatedly takes a lot of skill.
Yeah.
I think trappers and people are like fiddling with bows, whether, and there's all these people who argue over stuff. I don't really care if it's a stick bow to the latest, greatest crossbow, as long as it's legal where you hunt and you're having fun. I personally don't care. Have fun. I shoot a compound. I have for years, but I was raised, again, my life's been so cool. On one side of me, about 7 miles away, was Black Widow Archery. They're still a great company, make great recurves and lone bows.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, some of my friends I went to school with, they started out sweeping dust. And when Ken Beck, the guy that made it big, retired, he owner financed it and sold it to 3 of my buddies, and they're still there and doing great.
Very cool.
And the other side was Allen Archery.
Yeah.
If you don't know, Allen is the guy that patented the first compound bow. And the first ones looked like a 2x4 with some 1-bys coming off of it and steel cables going everywhere. So I had both those, in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I still have. It's actually out in my shop. But my neighbor, Aaron Hamilton, when I was a kid growing up, neighbors were half mile away or so at the time. But Aaron had a job working at Black Widow, sweeping sawdust or whatever. And he had a date and he needed $10 for gas or whatever. And so one of my first Black Widow bows was for $10 from Aaron because he got it for working there or whatever. And I've shot, deer and hogs with that bow and still have it. It's a little light now, but fun to play with. And I've kept it all these years, And so again, that community, that passion, that legacy of stories is, I think, something really binding.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt.
What can we say, man? Another year back with Hoyt. We're both shooting RX8s. I'm shooting 70 pounds in the bourbon, which I love bourbon.
It's great.
And you're shooting 80 pounds in the straight black.
Blacked out as always, man. I got so I'm shooting the 500 grain Easton Arrow this year. And at 80 pounds, I'm flinging that thing at like 300 feet per second. I mean, it's deadly. Put a water buffalo in front of me and he's done.
I mean, we shot it earlier. You literally put an arrow through a brand new target, like never been shot before.
I know. So one other thing that Hoyt is doing this year is they're making all their own strings in-house. And so the quality is top notch, and it just really is something that is setting them apart from their competitors.
Well, what we always try to do when we go to our bow shop, Ultimate Outdoors, is we try to shoot other bows just to make sure that we are really giving everybody a fair chance. Sure. The reality is it's a no-brainer. Hoyt, it stands above all of them every single time.
Definitely. And so right now you can use code HUNTR, HUNTR, for 20% off any apparel on the Hoyt website. And as always,
get serious, get Hoyt. So Grant, when you kind of finished up in Clemson and stuff, what ended up, because at one point in time you also had a hand in, like, was it biologic?
I did. Yeah. So I finished my degree at Clemson with David Gwynn, and I started about 2 years before I finished, doing some consulting, like in the Adirondacks in New York, not just local timber companies around Clemson, and going places. And I think I charged, I don't remember, $100 a day or something. Thought I was just slamming it down, man. I mean, man, I'm slamming it. I'm right there next to get my own jet to fly there, right? And in New York, I remember so clearly, in the Adirondacks, the only doe season, which is a huge area for those not
Yep.
familiar. The only doe season was 3 days with archery.
Wow.
And I got employed by this big club, Weller Mountain. I was just in New York last week, actually. And they had 18,000 acres. And it was an old club, the old plaid wool and cabins with grandpa's spikes nailed down the wall forever, and very historic, very traditional, very cool. No electricity, fire, little wood stoves or whatever. And they'd never killed a doe. Matter of fact, if you shot a doe for camp meat or whatever it's called back in the day, you were kicked out of the club. I mean, it was just taboo.
Wow.
And there was a browse line 6 feet high and, puny little deer, most of them not surviving the winter, no fawns, whatever. And so I was from that more southern school of management, quality deer management, you call it whatever, let's harvest some does, get enough food out here, grow some deer, pass some deer up. And man, there were 2 or 3 people in the club that bought into it. Fortunately, stronger members of the club, and the rest of them thought I was an idiot. I mean, oh my gosh, this college boy doesn't know anything. And I prescribed a program, and somehow they bought into it. And then I went to the state, and Nate Dickinson was the deer biologist of New York. New York has this huge history of deer. Listeners, Bill Severinghausen, whatnot, just a tremendous history of deer. And I prescribed this stuff, and they called Bill Severinghausen, which was a brilliant biologist. Up there, they called him Slaughterhouse because he also believed in harvesting does.
He did, yep.
So I was Slaughterhouse Junior because I was kind of promoting harvesting does. And so I got a permit from the state to harvest, I think it was like 100 does off this 18,000 acres, which sounds like a lot, but it's a drop in a bucket.
Sure.
And does had never been shot at. I mean, they literally walked around, looked at you. They were the sacred cow. And so I got this permit, and there was, literally threats and bad press and local papers. This guy, from South Carolina is going to wipe the deer herd out. And short story is I did this for 7 years on that property, and we literally shifted the conception date. The doe was so out of balance. Does weren't being bred on time. They were cycling late. And if you're cycle late in the Adirondacks in New York, and that fawn's born a month or two late, it can't survive the winter. It doesn't have enough body weight to survive the winter. So anyway, I won't bore you with all the scientific details, but we shifted the conception date, brought the sex ratio back in range, had a big food plot program, and actually got IP to cut some trees, more deer-oriented than just for profit, and turned that herd around, started producing some really nice deer. And so that word spread, and we started building from there. So we just started consulting. And when I graduated, Northern Arizona University and Michigan State had wildlife positions. Again, those are kind of rare, teacher positions.
Yep.
And I went and talked to folks at Northern Arizona. And you might think, why does a whitetail guy want to go there? Arizona has 7 different national forests, not districts, but 7 different forests, which is 7 different sources of funding for a professor. Where in Missouri, we have over 1 million acres of national forest for Mark Twain, but it's one forest, so there's one source of funding.
Right.
And they were the first major wildlife school to do team teaching. If you're going through general wildlife biology, you don't understand the biometry of it or the stats, someone else would teach that part, and you teach what you know. It was a really progressive program. And there was elk to hunt, too. So I thought, man, this is awesome, But I was consulting and making about the same I would have made as an associate professor. And I said, well, it sure is a lot of fun to go work with landowners and make programs and follow up. And so I just decided at that time, well, I'll go back to teaching 4 or 5 years. I want to do this consulting thing for a little bit. There was no plan, no written plan. This should not have worked at all. Again, just passion driving.
And was anyone else really consulting at that time, Grant?
Yeah, Dr. James Crow and Dr. Harry Jackson, James and Harry were, but they had a real job, university job.
Right.
Probably, not to be mean, I know these guys will, but university pickup and university computer.
Yeah.
If I wanted it, like at the time, I remember clearly, fax machines were big, and I bought a fax machine.
Yep.
I was like, can I afford this? Is this really, am I going to make enough money to pay for this thing?
Yeah.
So I think I was one of the first ones, if not the first one, kind of just planting your flag. And
from an independent side, especially.
Yeah. And just
when would that have
clubs
been?
have started having a little success,
Roughly?
or private landowners, more and more people, just, word of mouth. There was no internet. Hired me. It was me. It was me, myself, and I used to have 3 employees, me, myself, and I. And a janitor, and human resources and all that enrolled. Anyway, it was great. And I was traveling and meeting deer hunters and working on land. And I had a couple of rules. One was, if I take their money, I'll never buck up there. I'll doe hunt just to get to know them, help them get their doe quota. But I'll never shoot a buck. And we've lived with that through the years. And just really, I'll say one other thing I think that really helped me, and I think you guys do it well also, is I took technical information, from a Miller or a Jacobson or a Marchington and broke it down in Hunter E's.
Yep.
And again, I was blessed to do that because when I was in 5th grade, this doesn't seem relevant, but modern sliding glass doors and microwave ovens started getting a little more prominent. My dad was a custom home builder, brilliant man, my best man at my wedding, all that. But my dad did not learn to read till he was 60 years old.
Wow.
Whoa.
So when these things come out, they scared my dad. And so I would get out of school, or in the summers I worked with him, I remember clearly a quarter a day, I'd sweep floors and read instructions. And I would convert the instructions, because they're all legal terms, all that, to terms my dad could understand to install these newer at that time products. So my teaching or background is taking technical information and making it what I lovingly call, because I'm Bubba, I lovingly call it, Bubba E's.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I can remember Miller and Damaris were competing graduate students trying to get a job, and every deer study group, they'd be the two big ones everyone watched, and they'd try to outdo each other. It's all good. Everybody knows each other.
Oh, yeah. Fun.
And they'd talk in 6-syllable words. I'm from the Ozarks, man. I want to make it as simple as I could get. So I'd go to a hunting camp and explain why we need to harvest does in real simple terms, groceries, whatever, and not, a bunch of pheromone talk.
But you were foundationally basing that off of a lot of the scientific research. It's just you're translating it to them.
I was in that. I'm 5 years younger, I think, somewhere like that, than Damaris. I was just starting when they were finishing, so 4 or 5 years younger. So I wasn't competing with those guys, but I did. I presented every year, like you almost have to as a grad student at Deer Study Group for many years. One of my small claims to fame, I don't have many in my life, first person ever to show a trail camera picture at the Deer Study Group.
That's big.
And that's probably what got me in Georgia. I'd done that work in Missouri, actually. And in hindsight, I don't think Miller and Marchson wanted me. They wanted the cameras.
They wanted the cameras.
You couldn't go buy cameras anywhere. I had 6 of them, and no one else had any. I don't think they wanted me. My GRE score sucked. Everything sucked. I think they wanted the cameras in hindsight.
It was a package deal.
It worked out. It
is wild when you kind of go back and think about some of that stuff at that time. So what time frame would that have been when you were going into Georgia, Grant?
I think I moved to Georgia in 88.
Okay. Yep.
And I was there recent storm, God help those people, is horrible.
Yeah.
But I was in a master's/PhD program. I was going to be there 6 years. And 2 years in, I was studying big traditional rubs and some other stuff too, because I had these cameras. What bucks are actually coming these rubs? And we learned that does come to rubs too. And small bucks use big rubs. It usually takes a big buck to initiate a rub or reopen it that season anyway. And I had a little bit over 5,000 rubs mapped, not Onyx, back in the day, paper maps.
Paper maps.
On a 6,000-acre plantation, 17 miles out of Charleston, South Carolina. And I'd rub different parts. I had miles of rub line. I'd rub, different part every day. I lived there in a little single wide. That was a construction trailer. No plumbing, no cooking, anything. I had a crock pot. Drove my mom nuts. And I'd get, some venison or a squirrel or whatever. And I'd wash it about once a month. Just kept adding to it. And the flavor just kept getting better and better. The green stuff started growing around the outside edge. And so I had all these different projects that Dr. Miller and Dr. Marchson had outlined for me and stuff. I'd come up my own trying to answer questions and making progress. And 2 years into it, Hurricane Hugo come in. And I can remember it clearly. I'm hearing about it. I had the school Dodge truck. Back in the day, seemed like all trucks at school were Dodges. I had a not knocking Dodge, old, 2-wheel drive, 6-cylinder Dodge with an AM radio. And I'd eat my lunch every day in my truck, listening to the news, or, you didn't get much on AM radio, whatever you could find. And I kept hearing about this storm and everything. So I went to the plantation manager, Jimmy McCormick, who helped me a lot, and said, Jimmy, got this storm coming in. And Jimmy was an old Southern guy, very crusty Southern guy. Be like a bad thunderstorm. Only a blankety blank would leave because of that, So I didn't want to be a blankety blank. So I stayed there, and I was in my little trailer, and about 11 at night, I mean, that trailer was rocking, so I decided I'm going to the main house, which was Jimmy's house, because they had a big fireplace. My goal was, it was in September when no fire, getting the hearth of that thing, because driving over, the trees were bending, and it was bad. Well, anyway, it broke our wind gauge at 176 miles an hour. And out of 5,000 rubs, I think I found like 10. I mean, trees that are rubbed, the cambiums rubbed, are predisposed to wind damage. Bigger trees, So,
Wow.
I moved to the Bluff Plantation, and my good friend Joe Hamilton.
Yep.
The storm went just north of Joe's place, and I knew Joe through QDMA. You mentioned earlier, I think I was like member 18. Joe it was a Georgia grad, and he'd come to Georgia. And Joe's always bigger in life and got these great stories to tell and all this stuff. So Joe graciously invited me to where he was working on this plantation, which, by the way, it's just been his life class. They were filming the movie Forrest Gump on that plantation.
Really?
Yeah. And I had this one buck that liked to rub. These are wild free range deer on magnolia trees. So we called him the magnolia buck, and we rode a store, big trees, like big enough you could put a climbing tree stand in.
Jeez.
And we wrote a story that was on the front cover of Deer and Deer Hunting magazine about the magnolia buck. And then one of the roadies, one of the people setting up for the movies, ran over that deer one morning before daylight. And they told Joe lived on plantation, hey man, one of your doggone deer did in my car, So Joe goes down there, and Joe's a kind of a sentimental guy, a real artsy guy, really, because I'm not, so I honor Joe for doing that. And landline, so she calls me up, says, Grant, man, the magnolia buck ran over. So Joe dug a grave 4 feet deep and buried that buck and put the front cover of Deer and Deer Hunting magazine, or it was at the time, on that buck. We were again that passion about deer. But we would study these deer with these trail cameras. But it was a hunted plantation. It was a public. I'd done my previous work on public land. It's great work. This was private, but it's hunted, actively hunted. And the hunters there would find my cameras, think, oh, this is a great place, so I'm going to hunt there. And they never killed one of our bucks, because a lot of these big rubs are used at night. Yeah. They were not hunting where the deer were going to be during daylight time.
Yep. Yeah.
And when I first started seeing back in the day ladder stands all around my cameras, like, oh my gosh, this is going to bias my study, but it really didn't impact it much at all. And when Hugo wiped my study area out, Georgia said they didn't have money to, continue to start over. So Dave Gwynn at Clemson, and they were all buddies. Dave and Carl and Larry are all buddies. They said, hey, why don't you come to Clemson, and we'll get you at Joe's place and continue. And in hindsight, it was awesome, because Georgia is a tremendous technical school. I mean, every duck by its feet type deal, very technical school. It wasn't today.
Yep.
And Clemson, you probably couldn't age yourself by your driver's license, but it's a really good combined forestry and wildlife school. And so that technical work for 2 years at Georgia, including diseases and all that, and then combining forestry and wildlife, really has fit my career well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge piece of it. When you start to look at some of those things, that's what I always, the work that you were doing at Georgia, and just even kind of seeing some of these other people come through, from the 90s into the 2000s, it always seemed like schools like Clemson and Georgia and Mississippi State and Tennessee and Texas A&M, they were doing work that was applicable to the hunter or manager, right? And that's not to discredit any of the research that was done around genetics or evolution or anything like that. But, it really, I think a lot of people fail to understand the amount of really good research that is applicable to them. And it's because of what you talked about earlier, is oftentimes it gets left hanging in the peer-reviewed publications, and it never makes it to the actual hunting public, right? They never hear about it. They never know what happens.
I mean, Harry Jackson, I think, started that. Actually, Dave and Harry were both professors at Mississippi State before Dave moved to Clemson. Harry actually hired Dave, and Harry was good at getting with deer clubs. And Harry and Dave started the DMAP program in Mississippi, reaching out to hunters, getting them involved in collecting data. And Dr. Craig Harper, Craig and I are friends. Craig was also one of Dave Gwynn's students. He was like a year younger than me. And Craig changed the world when he took that job at Tennessee. They weren't known for that work. And Craig went there and started doing all this habitat work and the great work he's done, a phenomenal career, and really brought that to landowners in a lot of ways and educated a lot of people, including me. So yeah, it's interesting where like a Joe Hamilton made such a difference when he started QDMA and started really reaching out to hunters, and Harry Jacobson, and after him, of course, Steve Damaris and Bronson, and what Larry Marchington did at Georgia, and Craig is doing very actively. And I think that's a lesson for all your listeners: is one person can make a difference, man. They can get out there if they got that passion and that drive, and that passion will pull other people around them. And Craig's had great graduate students, and really influenced so many people.
Yeah,
just let it grow.
Just let it grow. That's
We've had Craig on at least once.
Yeah,
we like Craig a lot.
Well, I mean, we talk about it, and I don't necessarily like to call it the heyday, but so I graduated from Mississippi State in 2010. I started there in 06, 07. And but around that time, if I look in retrospective, who the professors were at the schools, who the grad students were, what we were talking about, it was man, we were in it. At that point in time, the momentum that QDMA had, which was driving a lot of just the awareness nationally, as well as the research that was conducting and the people that were in place. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a powerhouse, and everybody, like Grant said, everybody knew everybody in that space, right? You talked, you communicated, pretty often, and the little competitions at Southeast Deer Study Group. It was because everybody was trying to make everybody better at that point in time, take it to the next level.
I think it was true competition, like you said, where people were. A publication would come out, there's kind of a game changer, and that would spark another thought, and someone would take that slightly different direction, whatever. It was good and a lot of fun. I mean, after the deer study group, everyone would go out together and grab a sandwich or whatever. I'll tell you a funny one time. This actually was in Mississippi, deer study group, and I had a paper on conception dates from some work we were doing at Clemson. And of course, every grad student hated to see Harry Jacobson step to the mic. I mean, you trembled when he got there because he was really good and he was going to rip you.
You knew he had something.
So I made my presentation, thought it was pretty good, and Harry got to the mic and I'm sweating bullets, and he asked me something and I have no idea what it was, I stumbled through my answer and he redirected me 2 or 3 times. And I'm what do you want me to say? Just tell me what you want me to say.
Yeah.
And then out in the hallway, because he beat me up pretty bad. And out in the hallway, Grant, you did a good job. I just want to make sure people didn't misunderstand your data or whatever. It was that little competition. But while I was behind that mic up there and he was out in the mic in the audience, man, he was just seemed like he was just pounding me. He would not let up. I'm just get me off of here.
Yeah.
But it made me better. And then Dave Gwynn. Actually, Aaron Marston did this to Carl Miller. Carl was really good as a grad student. And so Larry sent his prelim questions, his written questions out to Harry Jacobson professors not even at Georgia, which I thought was kind of cheating, right? Because they don't want that graduate student doing better than their grad student. So I got ready to take my prelims at Clemson, and Dave said, hey, I think we're going to send these out to some other universities. That'll help you get a job. I don't know, man. I did not sign up for this. I want to be judged by my peers, not my competitors.
Not the competitors.
But it worked out fine.
Yeah.
It worked out fine.
Yeah, it was wild. I mean, just to kind of be in that atmosphere. And, I think there was a really good group for, whether it was a 10 or 15-year period there of just passionate people who wanted to take really good research at the university level, but apply it at the everyday deer hunter or manager level. There was a very good, consistent stream of that, and we saw that from the response. I remember, I want to say it was 2009 or 10 when we were in Louisville, Kentucky for the QDMA convention, and we had a big expo there, and I mean, it was packed to the gills of people who were passionate about deer hunting and deer management. And you had manufacturer brands there, but you had all these speakers going through. And I mean, it was it's one of the pinnacle types of deer management in the public that I remember.
Well, there was, exactly. That's where I was going to go with it. Was not only internally, on an educational standpoint, you guys were culminating, finding out all these new things, but it seems and I was young at the time, but my perception was the public was probably, the most open to or ready to to hear about that. It seemed like if you were to put it on a curve, I mean, I was there, even at a young age, but a lot of guys even older than me were like, it seemed like some antler restrictions had been in place, like Gary Alton type stuff like that.
Yep.
And like, so a lot of states across the country seemed like they were realizing like, hey, we can have some impact on, and hey, these big deer are pretty cool. And so it was all kind of culminating there, at the same time. I think that's probably why you and I talk and look back on like, hey, it was the heyday. Cause we're kind of on the other side of that a little bit, in the sense that there's so much information out there, and so many people I feel like are educated. Like it's not uncommon now for people to say like, well, a healthy buck to doe ratio, like that's a known thing, or like timber management. So I'm curious, Grant, like your feelings on because you're still doing a lot of consulting, is like as opposed to then, so right now it's like, how do you think things have changed in terms of people's perception on those types of topics? I mean, is the excitement still there? Like,
oh yes. We've been incorporated 34 years now, and blessed to stay busy. We're many consults behind right now, but there's differences. So one, like the big QDMA conventions, which were awesome and packed, and those went away. And I can remember when I was a kid, so I'm 63 right now, Ben Lee was, the biggest name in the world, and a big turkey caller, has online turkey calls, all that, and a great storyteller. And you go listen to Ben, and it would be packed. If the auditorium seated 500 people, it'd be 600 people there, literally. And now no one has seminars like that. No one. No one. Because of the internet, and you can get information at your comfort, or choose who you want to listen to, or whatever. So a lot of things have changed, and I'm seeing, which I'm not sure is really healthy, a split. We help people that want to grow the ultimate deer, which is fun, trying to tweak it out. I myself, we do a lot of work in Iowa. I could say Illinois, whatever, but I'll say Iowa. And still a lot of work in the South. I was just up in Ontario, so the fringes of it, so to speak.
Yep.
And I'd much rather work in the fringe, because a few little basic tweaks can make a 10% change real easy.
Right.
It's hard to go to Iowa and make a 10% change, right? To take a 180 to a 200, basically a 10% change, is difficult. And a lot of that's out of control of the landowner, land manager, whatever.
Yeah.
So I still prefer helping those people. Recently, not that far from you in Pennsylvania, a lady who just wanted, quote unquote, natural protein, had 40 acres, retained our services to come make her 40 acres a little more attractive so she could bow hunt that deer. It was just deer, which was really great to work with, to fill her freezer.
Yeah.
Just deer. And she was so pleasant to work with and fun. If you're listening, hey, I won't say your name. A professional lady, had made a bunch of money. And just those basic questions about deer. And I see that more. We work with people that just want to learn about deer and maybe shoot a few deer, get some meat for the freezer, which I think being a hunter recognized as a provider is about as wholesome as it gets, and really strong for the future of deer hunting.
Yep.
And the other side, I'm just going to generically call it the Boone and Crockett side. That's wholesome too, because they have to have really good herd health. And the habitat needs to be healthy. I'm not talking high fence, steroids or anything. I'm talking, free ranging.
Yep.
I need the deer to be on my property more hours in a day than on a neighbor's property, so I have a chance of harvesting it. I think that's healthy too, because there's big habitat improvements that a lot of game and non-game species benefit from. And they're spending a lot of private resources to make it better, which in turn impacts, the water cycle, the air cycle, the nutrient cycle, because of healthy habitat. So I think both ends of those spectrums are really healthy. We kind of draw the line of clients we will accept or not accept. We're blessed to be in that position where we can reject some. Is we like to take what's called a spectrum from, Bob Marshall wilderness area. Nothing's happening unless a lightning bolt hits and starts a fire.
Right.
To, breeding facilities and genetics and steroids and, electrolysis and everything like that. We like to work in that middle. Let's call it 10% off either end, right? We're managers, so you got to be able to do something. Plant a food plot, do a fire, otherwise you don't want us. You got to be able to do something. And I want to work with deer that are wild, free ranging. I think deer should be wild, not domesticated. And domesticated to me is if there's a lot of human manipulation to the animal itself, not the habitat, but the animal itself. Man is always one of my questions, my prelim questions, and now that I'm on the other side of this, adjunct professor at a few schools, whatever, before the student ever gets there, if they're going to pass or not. All you grad students out there listening, your fate is sealed. They just want to torture you, because I've been on that side of the desk too, right? So one of my questions was, what was the sex ratio and age structure of the North American deer herd pre-European settlement? And I remember I walked in Dave Gwynn's office, it was whatever Friday. You pick up your prelim questions a day. You got 30 days to finish these. And Dave goes, "Hey, Grant, how you doing? Here's your questions. You're not having trouble with them." "Okay, thanks, Dave." And I'm thinking, what's the difference between, this regression, that regression, whatever, And I cracked that baby open. I think that was the first one. And I'm like, "You guys want me to fail? No one has this answer." He says, "No, calm down. We just want to push your limits a little bit." So, you cry, and then you go to the library, and, you start, get over your pity party. And in my case, I started, well, who would know that? Who possibly, and archaeologists had dug up Indian middens or trash heaps outside of camps, and they put dirt over them so bones don't rot too quick. And you can sex a deer very accurately from the pelvic girdle, and you can estimate their age pretty accurately from the pelvic girdle. And I found records of about 10,000 pelvic girdles from Florida to North Dakota, and reconstructed the demographics of the deer herd before European settlement, which, by the way, ended up being almost a 50-50 adult sex ratio and equal age class of bucks and does. Of course, it's hard to do, but the age class now would be skewed because bucks die young and does still live old. But I was able to reconstruct that, and that question taught me a lot and made me push myself further and dig further. And so now I tell people I like to manage for a natural deer herd. And the best way I know to define natural is before European settlement here in North America. Man was still burning and killing and doing stuff, but there weren't herbicides or other things.
Right.
So let's manage for a close to balanced sex ratio. And I'm okay taking a little bit one way or the other. Really great hunting courses when you have more bucks and does, boy, they respond to grunt calls well, rattling. There's a lot of competition for breeding rights. It's a real intense rut. It's a lot of fun to hunt. That's inappropriate in some of the really bad CWD areas because males will carry CWD more frequently than females. So, we have to make some adjustments for modern times. But managing for natural sex ratios and age structures and always making sure there's enough food for all the mouths out there during the two critical stress periods, late summer, late winter. Those are our normal stress periods. Results in a really good herd. Then if you want to mark jury herd, I know Mark, so I'm not calling names or anything. A great herd, you're tweaking. You're getting in your toolbox, you're really tweaking stuff.
That's super interesting.
And that never gets old. That's like evergreen, right? That never gets old. Whether you're doing it in Florida or Canada, it never gets old.
We've asked that question a lot, and nobody's been able to answer it, I guess, until now about that. Like, is there a fossil record? Like, before we,
before European settlement.
And what do we call it, like market hunting and stuff, kind of decimated some of the herds, is what did that look like? And so you're saying, and you're pretty confident in that answer then. It was essentially like close to a 1-to-1 ratio.
I had Larry Marston and Dave Gwynn, some other really smart people in my committee, and they passed me. So I'm going to say at least there's 5 or 6 of us that believe that's right. Yeah. No, there's some potential biases. Fawns are the biggest age class on the land, right? Because they haven't had much time to die yet.
Yep.
If you're dealing with a deer herd that there's more 2-year-olds than fawns, you've got big issues.
Yeah, right.
Fawns are your biggest age class. But those fawn pelvic girdles have not calcified yet. So they decomposed in the Indian midden, the Native American midden.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So we don't have much of a fawn record.
Sure.
But to get to 50-50 at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, you pretty much had to start at 50-50.
Right.
Sure. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Lone Wolf Custom Gear.
Man, Jared, we are tree stand fanatics, and I think the one thing that we have learned over all these years is to kill big bucks, we got to be mobile. We've been hunting out of Lone Wolves for many years, the original Lone Wolf, and then obviously with the custom gear stuff, we were using the 0.5 and the 0.75. Yeah. And the one thing that we talked about is like, what if there were no cables? Here we are.
I really just don't know how you can beat it, frankly. But, a lot of that came, too, from a relationship that we've built with the DeQuistos. We've had both Cody and Andre on the podcast a few times. The passion for hunting, the outlook on the sport and stuff, I think is eye to eye with how we look at it. Everything that has gone into building this brand and to building these tree stands is something that we want to be a part of.
This is the 40th anniversary of these guys creating tree stands that have been critical to how we hunt whitetail deer today. If you look over the past, you'll see Andre's designs being implemented across so many stands over the years. such a cool thing, but really has changed the way that we all hunt whitetail deer from above now.
Right now, you can use code HUNTR, HUNTR, to get 7% off anything on the entire website. Be the lone wolf.
I think that's the thing that we kind of talk about, and we just get into more and more discussions about that. You know, people always go back and say, okay, well, what about like in the 90s and 80s, and eventually get into that point of like you were talking about, like in the Ozarks when you're growing up, there weren't deer. So we often try to think back to like, you know, that pre-settlement time frame, and it's like, well, you know, were there big mature bucks walking around?
That's what I want to be the case. Is like I've just, and you see paintings and stuff of it, is just like of the Indians killing giant bucks. I have to believe, my personal belief with no evidence to support it, is that happened.
I mean, there's some evidence, right, guys? One of the first famous big deer books was the Deer North America's, like 700-800 pages.
Oh, yeah.
I got a copy here somewhere. It's been revised since then, but the first one dived more into that stuff. And there was pictures they'd found on Native American reservations, whatnot, of big antlers. But I don't think there were quite as many. There was a really big predator component.
Right.
You know, two-legged. Millions of Native Americans counting on this as a primary food source. And,
Absolutely.
you know, wolves and stuff. And second thing is, there wasn't big soybean fields. There wasn't the nutrition.
Yeah.
So there was great nutrition. And to Craig's point, you know, native vegetation can be great, but when you got a 40-acre bean field, that's a bunch of nutrition. I'm just saying beans. It could be alfalfa, whatever.
Right.
Right there.
Yeah.
Deer can feed right there. And when it's native vegetation, there's not going to be as many pounds per acre of high-quality forage. It can still be awesome. And I'm a huge believer in forest management and native vegetation. I manage my own land like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as concentrated.
Right.
And I've done this. I've done this a lot. I've done it in seminars. But you can take soybean production by county. There's a map on the NRCS. You can Google this. Be soybean production by county. And then you can Google hardwoods by county. And that'd be on the U.S. Forest Service site.
Mm-hmm.
You split your screen and put them side by side. And then if you're pretty good at computer, you do one more screen. You pull up the Boone and Crockett map.
Yep.
And the Boone and Crockett map is almost a perfect overlay of soybeans by county. Now, it's not soybeans. That's just nutrition by county.
Sure.
That should be. Legumes by county. And where there's hardwoods, there's a closed canopy forest. There's not many Boone and Crockett's.
Mm-mm.
So then we can take this further. There's all this stuff that we don't have to guess about. We know these things. So Daniel Boone wrote a biography. He spelled like me, you know, B-A-R's bear. I'm not a very good speller either. Thank goodness for spell checkers. But Daniel was a brilliant observer, and his notes are incredible. And Daniel, when he literally walked across Kentucky, a couple things he said. He heard a turkey gobble every day, 365 days out of the year. Turkeys everywhere by thousands. Weren't many raccoons. They don't talk about raccoons. They barely mentioned ticks. They mentioned fire a lot, and big elk and big deer, because Kentucky was basically a grasslands.
Right.
There weren't many trees, not just the center bluegrass area, the whole area. The Native Americans burned enough that, you know, big mature trees, few saplings making it, but it was a savanna. And then we find that here in my area, Schoolcroft was an early explorer. I'm a geek. I like to read a lot. That was looking for lead deposits when there was only a couple of trapping cabins around here. And he went right through my area. I mean, he talks about a creek juncture. It's just over here a few miles. I mean, right through my area. And there weren't many trees. He talks about smelling fire all throughout the year. He took a journal just like Lewis and Clark. There's all these little guys all through America. They kept a journal like Lewis and Clark, but they're not near as well known. They didn't go from St. Louis to the coast, you know, went 150 miles. But you can find that explorer in your area and get a really good image of what the native habitat looked like. And even with this tremendous hunting pressure, there was a lot of game because people were eating game. They could kill. I need a deer today. I'm going to go kill a deer today.
Yep.
With relatively crude weapons and no Gore-Tex, right? I mean, they would go kill a deer that day.
Yeah. Yeah. So you knew it
so
was
we do
abundant.
Yeah, and they know a good bit about it, but there was so much hunting pressure, but it wasn't biased. Again, the middens, the pelvic girdles from a female, it will be a U shape for the birth canal to go through, and for a male that doesn't have a birth canal to be a V shape. So you can identify it really accurately. And those adult pelvic girdles were 50-50. I couldn't have cheated and made it more 50-50.
Yep.
And that's what they were harvesting. And I think they were harvesting a reflection of what was on the land. You know, if it was 7 yards away, the average shot with the primitive bow back in the day, the archaeologists tell us, you know, seven yards. How'd they get that close to deer all the time?
Man, I love that. Just the idea of that a lot. And I realize, big, antlers, and we hunt for recreation as much, if not more, than we do for meat these days. But I gotta believe that there were some Indian tribes or groups of Native Americans that were like got to the point where, and we were talking about it earlier, like whether it's in your DNA, what's the obsession with not just deer but big deer and antlers and stuff. I gotta believe there's some Native Americans that were like they were known for, like, they were giant killers.
I feel like they had to have had it, you talk about wildlife management and kind of how that evolves. The Native Americans had to understand sustainability, right? Like, because it was such a critical part of their culture and their food source, whether you talk about the white-tailed deer or elk or buffalo, whatever, like, they had to understand that they could only take so much so that there continued to be more the next year, right? That concept was in their head already. In fact, probably some of the burning and activities, like we always talk about in a joking manner, but it's like, did they bait?
Can we clarify that
right?
real quick? Like, we don't know that they were burning intentionally. Like, there was no management practices. It was just they were fires at getting away, right? There's no evidence of...
No. They burned... No. There's actually a graduate student now at Mississippi State doing wonderful work. He was one of my past interns. And he's really dug into that literature, kind of like I did the sex ratio stuff, and found records where Native Americans would burn to attract game to their hunting land.
Interesting.
Wow.
So they understood that concept of, like, if I set it back.
A couple hundred years of walking around, just pick a number, whatever number you want to believe in, and you go, man, I ain't seen a fresh buffalo pile of dung all day long, but I go over here where it burned last year and there's a bunch of buffalo over there.
Right.
I mean, I think they just put that together. I don't think that was rocket science.
No.
And then as far as sustainability, I'm not so sure about that, because they would sure drive, X herds of buffalo over the cliff and go cut the tongue out and leave the rest to rot. So I'm not
that's a
sure
good point.
they were,
Really?
thinking all that sustainable. I think they had really crude... I'm not knocking them, brilliant survivors. I could not survive in that environment. Brilliant survivors, but really crude hunting weapons and crude clothing. And so they were, if we were hunting in America, at least me, Grant, with a flint napped rock and a reed on a bent stick of wood, my harvest would go way down. Not like me back in the rabbit days, right? I'm not sure I ever got one. I don't know if I'd ever get a deer.
Can you say
so
that?
I think there were limitations that way, and that's a great way, to manage deer too. If we really thought we were running out of deer and we restrict everyone to flint napped rocks and recurved bows, our harvest would go way down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you say that part again, Grant? You're saying there's instances where they're driving buffalo, like over, and then just taking the tongue and leave
absolutely,
it?
Yeah, that's
really?
well recorded. Yeah,
wow.
Well recorded.
Yeah, I would not have guessed that, because generally the way you think, I think back on it, it was like that was like the white man basically got the blame for that, where they'd shoot all these and then just take the hides is what they were after. I was always of the belief that most of the tribes would, they were using everything, and that was like the biggest disagreement there, as far as game. No.
The white man had guns that could reach out, 100 yards or more, and locomotive trains to move stuff. A brilliant book for, readers in your audience, a brilliant book. If I can pull the name out, pretty sure it was Morse, was the first white buffalo hunter in Kansas. No. And he wrote it, and he lived long enough to write a book.
Wow.
And he had all these interactions with Native Americans and, hiding in hollow trees from Native Americans and getting all his pelts stolen by Native Americans. And this guy, he was a survivor, and he's actually, once the buffalo were gone, which was a pretty short period of time, he plotted out the street lines, still the streets in Wichita, Kansas, and
wow,
made his claim to fame doing that. And he wrote a book, his biography, and it is fast. His observations are fascinating about chasing buffalo where it recently burned or burned the year before, and the grass had grown back and whatnot, and the giant elk in Kansas, and they'd always be in the riparian zones or the creek drains. So again, we don't have to listen to, XYZ, whatever, to assume on this stuff. And no, I don't think the Native Americans, they were awesome. I'm not knocking them at all.
Sure.
But I don't think they were winning the Aldo Leopold Award for Conservationist of the Year. They were just trying to survive with very crude resources.
Yeah, and just because of those crude resources, they couldn't be as efficient to therefore knock back some of these populations. Like, obviously, when settlers moved in with guns and locomotives that they could take more and be more efficient at that.
I would bet, though, maybe not that they were conservation minded, but I would think just because of like the mortality, like their realization of, that they would probably were, very spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You hear about like
You see
medicine
that.
men and stuff. So there probably was some concept of like, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting my stuff from movies and stuff. I've not done a lot of Native American, but you think about them like putting something back in the earth or like, being grateful for that. I think maybe not conservationally minded, but there was like a spirituality to that is attractive
Huge.
about the deer hunting. Yeah.
Huge amount of that, and reverence for the game and the land and the sun.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Unquestionably huge. Where we can be guilty, I can be guilty of just chasing a deer or whatever. It was I think, very spiritual, and I think hunters that get the most enjoyment out of it and stick with the sport the longest also have that kind of reverence.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I know some guys that are really good at killing really big deer. I'm sure y'all know this, but there are many world record typical deer on walls now that do not get recorded because people don't want to know. They don't want their hunting areas messed up. They don't want the notoriety. They don't, getting $1 million for wearing Joe Blow camo underwear doesn't change their lives. So they don't, they don't want that.
Yeah.
But I've had in my hand multiple world record net typical deer that will never be recorded on client land. And, and these people I've witnessed through my career. And Dr. Kellogg, it's not Kellogg, it's Kelly, something like that. I'm boogering that up a little bit. Published this growth we all go through as hunters, and some people get stuck in different stages. You go hunting, then you tag your first deer, then you want to kill a lot of deer, then you want to kill a bigger deer, then you want to kill a bigger deer with primitive weapon, and then you get to a more spiritual place where it's the whole holistic approach to hunting. This is well published. And I've seen people that literally have, world record deer, not just saying that, not 2 inches from it, go through that change also. And some people get stuck. My dad's my best man, my wedding best friend. I lost my dad 6 years ago, great guy. And Grant's his son, not that means anything. And at my place, if I didn't put my finger on the safety, if a spike buck walked out, Dad was shooting it, baby. He never got out of that first stage. Now, he was raised in a period of no deer, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
just a chance to hunt deer. My dad was dying of cancer. I knew it was his last hunting season. I'd wrap him up in sleeping bags, put him in a ground blind. He'd lost so much weight.
We've seen it. Yeah, we watched those hunts, Grant. I remember that. Yeah.
And the best 2.5-year-old buck on the property steps out. I mean, the one that's got a chance of going somewhere,
Yeah.
And I was hunting with my dad, and I knew right then that deer is dead.
He's dead.
He is dying right now. And my dad wouldn't even wait for him to turn broadside. He shot him right here and dropped him like a rock.
Yeah.
And we celebrated, hugged, and all that stuff. It's great. I wouldn't trade those hunts for anything in the world.
Yeah.
But I knew instantly, it's like, oh, don't let it be that one deer. Lord, give him some other deer to hunt.
Yeah. We've all done it. I mean, Grant, what do you think is that phenomenon of like getting stuck at stages of, and it's not like in a looking down sense at all, but like, we just talked about it openly. We've all evolved through different, and some of us at different, rates or paces. And so we're like, okay, I feel like, hey, I'm, and Jeremy and I are constantly talking. So we're like, okay, we feel that we're at this certain point, and we've been blessed to talk to, some people that are way far along, way further than us in their trophy hunting career or whatever, to where they're, they can share and impress upon us like the spirituality of it. And we'll talk too. It's like we hunt with guys, and I'll give my dad all the credit in the world, but he's one of them that I feel like is kind of like here, I mean, he's, and so we talk all the time about like, man, what is it that, and there's another guy, Willie, and great guys. We love hunting with them, but it's like, we do ponder, we're like, what has them stuck at, that point? Are they stuck? It's not like we're right or they're wrong. It's just like, how do you have to kill a big deer like to proceed to the next level there? Or what are the things that spur, the growth through those phases?
Man, I'm a simple biologist. That's over my head. My theory or my hypothesis would be it'd be something based on your experiences or what you've had in life. If you've been, there's a lot of studies on this too. if you were raised very without many financial resources like I was, great childhood, wouldn't change it for the world, you tend to, until you do a little bit better in life financially, hoard stuff, right?
Yep.
Oh man, that's the bow I shot 5 years ago, but I may need that again. I've got 4 more bows newer than that, but I am not giving that away. And,
Yeah.
and so like my dad, again, raised with no deer and very few deer, no first several hunting seasons I experienced in this part of Missouri, there was no doe season. I mean, no legal way to harvest a doe. And those guys that were raised like that, just like Depression era people tend to really value food, and there's 3 green beans left over, they put that in Tupperware and keep it in the refrigerator. I think it's just a scarcity or something like that. That of those older people and younger people. I mean, some people, there's nothing wrong with this. Some people just have fun, just deer hunting and yucking it up and having fun.
Of course. I think,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
Not at all. And I'm not saying there is. It just, so it's interesting. So maybe to put it a different way, like my perception is, it's like you see a guy shoot, a 2-year-old 8-point, a 2-year-old 8-point, a 2-year-old 8-point, or whatever, year after year after year, it's, I think, human nature to compare, to be like, how would I feel about that? And you're like, I don't know. If it was me, I'm like, what is the intrigue? I'm like, it's just a dead deer now. And so, we find yourself having those discussions with those guys you're trying to help them along through the process. Or you'd be like, if you let that one live, like it would be bigger. And they seem to acknowledge or realize that, but then they're like, but I'm not going to, I'm still going to shoot it.
I don't know. I mean, you guys are really skilled hunters and physically fit and all that stuff and doing great. But there's some people that just, by their choices or whatever, didn't have those opportunities or don't have them, or they just want to have fun. I mean, man, I went to high school with guys that were outstanding athletes, outstanding at any level, and had chances to go to college. And no, I'm going to stay here at the farm and bale hay. And I'm like, man, I got to feed cattle and help my dad build houses, go to college to pay for it. And someone's wanting you to go to college and pay you to run up and down the floor with the pumpkin ball. Man, I can't believe you're not going.
Yeah.
So, we're all different. It's all different. And I, myself, I'm not very coordinated. I still have fun taking my recurve bow and, going with some buddies on public land, once a year or whatever. And, by golly, better watch out, that spike buck walks out. I'm just out there having fun with my buddies and having a good time.
Yeah.
It's legal, ethical, whatever it is. So I think that it's where each person is. And fortunately, the whitetail resource is still so broad and omnipresent that there's room for all.
Yeah. I think just so much has changed in, even in the last, let's say 30 years, right? So like go from 1990 to where we are today. Like a lot of us who grew up, like my first hunting season was sometime in the mid 90s as a 12-year-old. I remember stories of like my dad and grandpap telling me on the opening day of gun season in PA, if we didn't see 100 deer, it was a bad day. Right now, we may not have seen a single buck in that 100 deer, but if we didn't see 100 deer, it was a bad day. To, basically 6 or 7 years later, Gary Alt putting in concurrent buck and doe seasons and antler restrictions. I mean, the evolution that kind of happened there and kind of, frankly, it forced people to change to now where it's like, between cell cameras and the amount of information that are out there, like there's all these changes that are happening that if you put somebody through that entire era, I guess, frankly, you can only change and evolve so much to where at some point you're probably just like, man, I'm tired of just like, I just want to go out and enjoy what I grew up doing, what I had so much fun doing.
I agree with you. And again, I think there's room for everyone. I challenge all the professionals out there to do this every now and then. I grew up 20 miles this way, literally, hunting on Piney Creek Wilderness Area, 7,000 acres with no roads. It take on Forest Service land, you got to be 5,000 acres or more with no roads, no access to be a wilderness area. So 7,000 acre wilderness over here. It's steep, rocky, closed canopy. That's all I knew at the time, right? Public land. So, man, we'd go down there and camp, and it'd rain. You drive by camp, be orange hanging in every tree limb trying to dry out. Only scent control you knew was bacon. You cook the bacon, try to cover yourself with bacon smell or something like that. And those were fun days. We didn't harvest many deer. They were fun days. Walk your fanny off. You always thought, boy, the more we walk, better chance of seeing a deer. And those are still fun.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to spend my career hunting the Piney Creek Wilderness area, but it's still fun to go do every now and then. So I like chasing old deer. I'm chasing an old deer now in my place called Lucky, and he doesn't score very high. He's lucky because I can't kill him. I mean, man, this
Is that
thing's
deer still
7 or 8
around?
years old, going
Wait,
downhill.
How old is that deer?
7 or 8. And I live on the land. I mean, I'm right here.
Yeah.
And
Well, I was going to say,
Lucky's
boy,
just-
I almost remember Lucky.
The other night I was hunting, over here. Little cold front come through. I said, tonight, Lucky goes down. I've got him patterned. It's good. And Lucky shows up a half mile away on the trail camera.
Jeez.
Yeah.
And that's keeps it fun.
Yeah.
And again, not being a big stud killer, I can laugh at these things. Boy, I'd hate to be the guy that had to have a big buck on the show every week.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
To have an audience.
It's a lot of pressure and inevitably has to take some of the enjoyment out of why we all kind of do what we do.
I would think that pressure would, but I'm going to give him benefit of doubt. I'm going to say at least it makes it more like a business than fun. One of my goals is always to have fun.
Yep.
I've had 2 kidney transplants. I'm blessed with super health for a transplant patient. You don't meet a lot of transplant patients 32 years out. So a bad day is when you're laying there and you sure hope it goes beep one more time. That's a bad day.
Yeah.
Not getting your buck, and I'm not just being, gushy here, not getting your buck or whatever. Those aren't bad days. Bad days are when you hope you get to hunt one more day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Well, it helps us keep it in perspective for sure. I mean, that's what we were saying earlier, whether it was on the Hunt Companion this morning but it really is just a deer. I mean, for as seriously as we all take the management throughout the year and we want to believe, there's a strategy for this deer and we've got goals for ourselves. It's,
They're just deer.
it really is. It's just a deer at the end of the day. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big thing.
I do
to
believe
remind
all the management's really healthy. I mean, I think people planting food plots and there's droughts and they don't grow. Well, there's a lot of farmers out there trying to make a living in a drought.
I know.
Or doing a prescribed fire and having to have a plan and control it. I think whatever it is, people engaged in an activity that the reward is somewhat tied to their effort
yeah.
is extremely healthy
Yeah.
for our society. It's just the opposite of sitting home waiting on a government check to come.
Yep.
You're engaging in something physically, financially, whatever it is, expecting a better reward.
Mm-hmm.
And there are metrics you can measure that by: seeing deer, maybe harvesting deer, growing more pounds per acre, forage, whatever it is. I think stimulates a growth mindset, a being productive mindset. And most of us deer hunters still believe, I raised my daughter's deer hunting. I mean, deer is so important to me. My oldest daughter is named Raleigh, Raleigh. That's dweller by the deer meadow in Old English. My youngest daughter, Ray, Rae, is Hebrew for doe. I mean, I'm pretty sure anyone that saw the Woods family would say deer is really important to their family. From a practical point of view, again, I'm a transplant patient. I do my health care at the Mayo Clinic, Rochester, Minnesota. Every year I meet with a dietitian. And it's important for transplant patients to keep their weight down, not, because excess fat is just hard on bodies. I'll just say it out loud. This is from the Mayo Clinic, not Grant Woods.
Yeah.
And so, hey, Grant, what are you eating this year? And, well, I had a few too many Snickers bars on the road, but other than that, I'm doing pretty good. I eat a lot of venison. That is so great, man. And this is, the Mayo Clinic dietitian talking. Wild game, specifically wild ungulates, deer, elk, moose, is the healthiest meat we can eat. And I heard that for years. So then I got with this Dr. Stefan Van Vliet. He's one of the world leading human nutritionists at Utah State. He was at another school for that, has this massive lab, and they measure over 500 different types of nutrients, not just protein and calcium stuff we all think about. And these are called phytonutrients, stuff that the sun does to plants.
Mm-hmm.
And then ungulate, ruminant consumes that, cow, deer. And actually that's maintained in the transfer. So it's always been thought that wild-caught salmon was the healthiest food we could put in our body. And Dr. Stefan was doing some work in Hawaii, and of course they have axis deer that Europeans brought there a long time ago, let loose, or feral deer now. And someone said, hey, I think this axis deer meat's pretty good. So, on a whim, he took it back to his lab and measured it. It was better than wild-caught salmon.
Wow.
So right now we have 17 deer from the proving grounds at Dr. Stefan Van Vliet's lab. And the preliminary tests, like the ratio of omegas and all this stuff, way over my head. I'll have him on our show someday to explain it all. Maybe the healthiest meat on the planet.
Wow.
So I think about the old Jeff Foxworthy video. Jeff's a great guy. He's got his big buck teeth in.
Yeah.
I can laugh and think about him. He's like, got his little whiteboard on a tree by the old ratty camper, and he says, my wife to understand, I'm out here trying to bring back this organic meat. This is like 20 years old, long time ago. And I don't remember what he said. I got X in my lease, and X in my new deer rifle, and X in my camper, and I got about $300 a pound and the best meat in the neighborhood. She should be wanting me to have another deer lease. It's way funnier than I'm explaining. Turns out a lot of that's true, right? So a hunter can be a provider, and we can bring home the healthiest thing by far our family's going to put in their mouth. I think there's a lot of merit to that.
Yeah.
And even from a management point of view, from getting a doe harvest up, a lot of states are behind on doe harvest and whatnot. When you're bringing home the healthiest thing your family can possibly eat, that's pretty rewarding.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, we think about it, again, go back 30, 40 years ago, and a lot of that was, my mom's side of the family. I mean, remember vividly her telling stories like my grandpa put deer on the table. That's what they ate. I'm sure, he's passed at this point, so he can't be put in jail for it. I'm sure he poached a lot of deer, shot deer because he needed food on the table. They were poor. Like that's what they ate, right? If they didn't have food in May, he had to put food on the table type of thing. And so, but fast forward that even to today, think about like how critical we are of what we're putting in our bodies from a food standpoint. And, we've all seen the comparisons of like what ground meat should look like and what it looks like when we buy it at the store or whatever. And it's like, if you realize that, and then you understand like the value that venison can provide to you and your family, it kind of becomes a no-brainer at that point.
Oh yeah. And all these 500 plus different phytonutrients and all that stuff. And you're going to the store buying XYZ protein powder, or you could get even better nutrition out of a wild free ranging deer. It's amazing. And we got to think about Lewis and Clark and the other guys again that wrote these journals. They meat on meat on meat for many, many days in a row with nothing else.
Right.
And Lewis and Clark were making 20, 30 miles a day upriver. I mean, pushing a boat upriver.
Yep.
Talk about working out.
Yeah.
And they were doing that on meat with no veggies.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool stuff, off subject, but really, really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's played a role in my longevity as a transplant patient.
I bet. I mean, I would have to assume. I mean, if the nutrition and taking care of yourself and keeping weight down is that critical, I mean, that seems like it would make a lot of sense.
Can I just ask, Grant, since you bring it up, what your dietitian at the Mayo Clinic, what are their feelings on, I guess, on vegetables? I'm curious. Like, is that a big part of the diet in addition to meat, or is it predominantly meat?
It's probably like everything. Depends on what year you go and what nutritionist you get. The old food pyramid, which has been proven, was a commercial event to drive grain sales up. This is not questionable now. This was a government thing.
Yep.
But I eat a lot of meat, and I do eat vegetables. I eat a lot of meat. I think the common sense stuff is we all, at the Mayo Clinic anyway, we should all back off sugar a good bit. Sugar's kind of in everything. You pick up any label, pick up green beans, read around, there's sugar in there or something, So knocking a bunch of sugar out and eating as much as you can of a unprocessed type food. That's their big lesson at the Mayo Clinic. Back off the Doritos and the bologna or whatever, and eat as much whole food as you can. Whether that's blueberries or meat or whatever. I like meat. I'm a carnivore. I got these canines here on the side of my mouth. I like meat myself. So and we have an ample supply of it. So I eat a lot of meat.
Well, again, I have no
I'm meat
evidence
heavy.
to support it, but I kind of have backed off of vegetables. I just, I don't read way into the diets and stuff, but I'm just like, you hear about like, oh, there's this or that in like held in broccoli heads or like in different especially with herbicides and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't really eat vegetables anymore.
Yeah.
I'm like mainly meats and fats. Like I'm real big into fatty, like even avocados and like the whole even some butters and stuff like that's like there's different ways they process it and stuff, but that's how I've been going about it.
It's your style.
I did have McDonald's on the way in here though, so I'm not
your process.
not a perfect dietitian, but in general that's what I'm striving for.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's that 80-20 rule, right? We
Yeah.
try to eat 80% good and you have your ice cream every now and then or something like that. But as a patient, what I've been told for many decades now is skip the processed food and eat whole foods. And it's up to each individual. There's people that eat a vegan diet that do great. There's people that eat all meat, only meat that do great. I think every body, every individual genetic organism is probably a little different. You kind of figure out what works best for you. For me, pretty heavy on meat and, some veggies, and leave the snacks alone as much as you can. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like for me as a runner, like, a lot of people say, well, like avoid carbs, don't eat carbs. Like I eat a lot of whole grain pastas. I eat a lot of like brown, or wild rice. Like I eat a lot of carbs, but they're like healthier carbs. Like I'm not eating Doritos and whatever else.
Unless it's deer camp. Doritos are a staple for deer camp.
Yeah, that's true.
Blue backs are in trouble.
Yeah, so is a day beer every once in a while.
Some day beers are in trouble also.
Yeah, that happens. So
the HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Sever.
Well, one of the biggest things that we always talk about is what our arrow setups are. And this year we're shooting the Sever Broadheads. I think we're both shooting the new 2-inch titanium broadhead. And so, we're huge proponents of expandables. And I know we've had this argument back and forth with people, but we're
right and you're wrong, and you just need to accept it.
We just want to have a giant wound that pumps out blood. That's the bottom line.
We build our arrow setups and shoot bows, to maximize penetration, and we shoot broadheads that are going to give us the best blood trails, the most hemorrhage possible. And so part of those setups is we're also shooting the Easton arrows here coming up pretty soon. So we've shot the Victory in the past, and there's all kind of great arrow shafts on the market, but like we're looking for a whole system from broadhead to arrow components to the arrow shaft itself. And the more we look at some of these Easton shafts and the components that go with them, that setup's going to be really deadly for us.
Yeah, I'm actually using the Easton traditional axis right now in my traditional setups for both my recurve and my longbow. I've got a 100-grain brass insert on those, and then obviously I'm using a fixed blade broadhead on those specific shafts.
Right on.
So, but yeah, our goal is always to be shooting the best broadhead that we think is going to be the most lethal for our setups. We've done plenty of research. We believe in the Sever Broadheads, and we hope you would check them out at Sever Broadheads as well.
Well, Grant, just, we kind of talked about it a little bit there at the beginning, but I guess you grew up in the area, but how did the proving grounds kind of come about? Like what kind of tripped your trigger on this property? And really, obviously, it's a large piece of ground. So, I mean, it's a financial commitment as well.
Yeah, I wasn't rich and not rich now. So my wife Tracy and I were married, living in South Carolina after I'd finished Clemson. We had 13 acres, both farm kids.
Mm-hmm.
Tracy's Southern Belle, raised just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, on a pig farm. I married a pig farmer's daughter. So we wanted more land, had our first child, wanted more land. And boy, we had three objectives, three criteria. We wanted to be within an hour and a half of an airport. I was traveling a lot, still travel a lot.
Right.
Want to be in a good public school. Still believe your kids got to get out there and face the world at some point. Want to be in a good public school.
Yep.
And had to be able to afford the land. And boy, we looked around to Charlotte and Greenville and Athens and Atlanta and, Nashville, and we just couldn't afford anything. And we'd come back to see my family. It was the first day, I remember it clearly. I guess you might call it a date day, that Tracy and I had left our oldest daughter, Raleigh. One of us wasn't with her, left her with my parents. And
yep.
Tracy and I driving around, talking about health, and we stopped to get an ice cream south of Branson here. And I got mine, and I walked across the road looking at all the condos they built in the river bottom where I used to bow hunt, thinking, oh my gosh, I've run this area. And she'd picked up a little real estate guide that used to be in a little newspaper, stands, whatever.
Yep.
And said, here's some land for sale. And very selfishly, because we're supposed to go shopping. Very selfishly, I said, call the agent because I did not want to go shopping. Never thought about moving back home. And it's long story short, we looked at it. It was 1,500 acres, and a guy had died 7 years previously and left it to a hospital.
Oh, wow.
And they decided they were going to sell it, and they had sold it to a big developer, but the deal didn't close. It fell through, so they just put it back on the market. And so we looked at it, and I actually rented a four-wheeler. The little real estate lady showed me it was really rough land. She couldn't drive around. So next day, I rented a four-wheeler from my high school buddies and went and rode the property. And we offered what we could afford, not anywhere close to what they were asking, what we could afford, what we could finance, we thought. And they wrote us a pretty nasty letter. No, heck no. And a year later, they wrote us a letter that says your offer is still good. So again, God blessed us.
Wow.
I mean, I said literally, we bought it for about 20 cents on the dollar. And one of my neighbors, still one of my neighbors, get along fine, had kind of just taken it over and had put about 100 head of cattle. The proving grounds, I've never worked a property in my career where there were so many cattle skeletons where they starved to death. That's how bad it was. And that was a deal we could afford. So I called the hospital and said, hey, I want y'all to cancel this cattle lease before we buy it, because I don't want to, move in the neighborhood and be the bully, so to speak. And they said, what cattle lease? The guy hadn't even told the hospital he's running cattle.
Wow.
They just abandoned the property. They'd never seen it.
Yep.
Guy died, left them, they'd never seen it. So anyway, I had to give a sheriff, whatever, get that straightened out. And we started. We had no budget at all. It was me and a chainsaw and,
Was there a house on it?
No, we built before it was popular, built a little barn dominium.
Okay.
Another story, I'll wax a little bit here. So we raised our kids in a real small environment, and we're bumping each other. And now my two daughters are best friends. We all get along great. And I think being close, you had to mind your manners because you couldn't just go to your room and get away from everyone. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, and just, growing deer kept growing. I had Biologic, and I had started Biologic and gave 51% to Toxie Haze or Mossy Oak. No money changed hands because I'm not smart, but I'm smart enough to know they're a massive marketing machine, and I knew the biology of plants. And so they took us from selling, like 3 bags out of your back of pickup to a buddy to putting us in Walmart in just overnight.
Wow.
And that blew up big. And no hard feelings, still friends, all those, but it wasn't a good fit for me. So a few years later, I sold my shares out of Biologic, and that helped us make a big payment on the ranch and get a tractor for food plots, and just kept chipping away and keeping trespassers off because it'd just been like public land.
Right.
Except worse because MDC wasn't patrolling it.
Yeah.
And it was split by county lines. So neither sheriff was kind of getting there. It was literally split by county lines. So right on the fringe of both counties. Made friends with the local game warden, still friends with him today. And that's a big thing. And just, there was no growing deer in mind.
Yeah.
And I'd come home from traveling. I was consulting all the time. I was paying for this by consulting. And sitting split leg on the floor, rolling the ball back and forth with my daughter, and the phone rang. And the night before, I was flying back from New York, wherever I was working, and missed my flight and got in strung out from the road about 11 a.m. in the morning, sitting there playing ball with my daughter before I went to bed and caught up on sleep. And the phone rang. As soon as the phone rang, she said, Daddy. Because that's how she knew me, a telephone. And it crushed me. I'm very family oriented. It crushed me. And I told my wife, I guess I got to go back and teach at a college or something because I got to be part of my kid's life.
Right.
And that's right at the time when Winky had started Midwest Whitetail and was talking to me, Bill. And I said, maybe, I don't know. I'd never been behind a camera, but I used to do, I think it was called Conservation Minute for Cuz at Mossy Oak. They used to have a big show called Hunting Country, pretty big show. And each episode there'd be a minute about, I can remember episodes, persimmon trees or whatever. And I've done some other stuff. So I've been around cameras, never behind one. And so anyway, we started growing deer, had no idea what we're doing, getting no written plan. No, internet was kind of new, no idea. But because the internet was new and we had hunting content, we started growing because wasn't much competition.
Yeah.
Especially on the management side, there were none that I'm aware of.
Yeah, none.
And so anyway, God bless that. We started growing, and I thought that would get me out of consulting, but that just made it better because people would see more exposure, I guess.
Sure.
And hired some people and just kind of kept hiring people and going along, and that's how it started. But it never started to be as the basis of a show. We call it the Proving Grounds because it was so rough and rocky, and literally cattle had browsed everything. I mean, there were no deer. The first year I owned it, sunk all my money in debt up to here. And I walk all the time to try to stay in shape for my transplant. And I had paper topo map, and I'd go down about 50 yards on a ridge. The proving ground's real steep, up and down real steep. And I'd go down about 50 yards, walk that ridge. Next day I'm home, go down 50 yards, walk that, just learning it, making notes on my paper topo map, all folded up, how it is. And that first year I saw one deer. I saw a doe, or I saw a tail go around a cedar tree. I saw one deer.
Cow.
We did not hunt the property for 5 years.
Really?
We talked about the passion. We did not hunt. I didn't let my dad hunt. No one hunted for 5 years because there just wasn't enough deer.
Wow.
It had been shot out. And all the bubbas were still coming in. I had some interesting conversations out in the timber with some people.
I bet.
And anyway, got that under control. And then one of my neighbors, who I'm still friends with today, Mr. Clevenger, killed the first 10-pointer I knew of on the property. I'd seen him, 2 years old. I had some trail camera pictures of him. And my neighbor shot him and wounded him, and he died on our place. And this was like, 105-inch deer, biggest deer we'd see on the property by far. And I found that deer a week later, and I cleaned up the skull and the jawbone, and I took it around to him. And my buddy's like, "Oh, don't give that guy," So, no, it's an educational moment. So I cleaned it up, called him, "Hey, you home? Yeah, come here." And I brought it to him. I got it. At first I gave him the rack, the head. And, "Oh, yeah, that's great." So, "Hey, let me show you something else." And I pull out the jawbone. And I do the old ice cream cone. Think of a, chocolate ice cream cone dipped in vanilla. Talk about wearing replacements. Say, "Hey, this deer's 2 years old. Imagine what would happen if he'd been 3 or 4 and just started working in the neighborhood." And that's how it came to be.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, you think about that 1,500 acre property, and still because of, how that property was and how it laid and how, essentially it had been just, ravaged by cattle and stuff, like the importance of the neighborhood still at that point.
Super important. And, we ended up, we've sold that 1,500 acres. Over time, when land would come for sale, we'd try to buy it. We had another 900 acres on the back, which is where I am now, that I never had the budget to work on. And so my wife and I had been there 20 plus years. We finally built a house, and, kids are in college or whatever. And one day I just thought, what if we sold this? Because it wasn't, you never get it perfect, but it was pretty good, right? I'd worked on it 20 years.
Yeah.
Passionately. And it was pretty good. And I said, what if we sold this and started over? You get a new house, I get a new project. Kind of just jokingly.
Yeah.
What if we did this, Yeah, that'd never happen. Go ahead if you want. Well, we doggone sold the thing. A guy from Texas, it was a cash deal. Those type properties are very well improved. Usually they're above appraised value, so it's got to be a cash buyer. Y'all know this as agents. So a guy come along, it's so quick. I thought it'd be a guy that studied growing deer, knew growing deer. Guy never even heard of growing deer. Didn't know me from Adam's house.
Really?
And yeah. And property, and Trace and I took over this. We had the 900 acres. First thing we got a little rental house, a little scuzzy rental house, and we had to build an office. Right, first thing we had to do. The guy was gracious and gave us some time to use our office there, but we was in a hurry to get a office built, which during COVID is horrible. Couldn't get materials. You couldn't get a light switch hardly. It was horrible.
Yeah.
And built an office. Got our team moved over here, and started. Same process, but now I hope I know a little more, a little quicker. So we're burning, cutting trees, hacking squirt. We're doing a little different. On this 900 acres, we have 32 acres, 33 acres of food plots. The other property was really food plot centric. And I love food plots, love tractor time, but want to do a little different. So we're doing a lot of native habitat work here. And, I want to see how fast I can go from a really scuggy property to a 170-inch gross, gross score, just 170 type deer, what most people consider a good deer.
Yeah.
And we don't have him now. I killed a 163 last year, which for the Ozarks is good. That's like a marked jury deer in Iowa is a 163 in the Ozarks will turn some heads.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But got a little ways to go. We've had a wicked drought this year, so we're not going to cross that thing this year. But we have some outstanding 2 and 3 year old bucks. So I'm thinking a couple years we're going to get there.
Very cool. So you made that transition during COVID year?
Yeah. 2 years
Yeah.
ago, it was horrible. Stupid.
Yeah, that's a lot. So, I mean, so as kind of going into that, are you say you're looking at some of the native habitat and stuff. I mean, what do you think your baseline is on this 900 acres compared to when you inherited like the 1,500?
So there's a lot going on. The 1,500 acres and 900 acres are neighbors.
Okay.
3/4 mile or so. So there's some bleed over, right?
Yep.
I'm sure there's going to be some good deer from the original property that drift in and out.
Sure.
And then we have a neighbor, a pretty large neighbor. There's a little bit more of a developed land that there's no hunting on. So we get a bunch of, 70-pound does coming in our food from there.
Yep.
And as far as turkeys, that 3,000 acres is kind of like a golf course community. There's 14 million coons, I think, that's been eating cat food coming over here.
That sounds right.
Big old coons. They've been on old lady Houlihan's back porch eating cat food.
Exactly.
Every night coming over.
Yeah.
So we're trapping very aggressively. We talked about it earlier. Last year, I think we caught 131 coon and possum.
Wow.
And turkey populations responding, plus habitat work too.
Yep.
But we weren't. We were seeing your standard. About anywhere can grow 120, 130 inch deer, at least a few of them. About anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Midwest oriented anyway.
Yep.
So that's what we start with, and getting some 140s, 150s. I would pull a picture up, but last winter, my youngest daughter Ray, come home to hunt a day or two and shot a really nice big 10-pointer. I don't think I ever measured it, but 140 plus deer, a nice deer.
Yep.
The deer we knew. I'd actually seen and did not pass because I'm safe for my daughter. I'm not that nice. This is a good deer for here. I just couldn't get a shot. There's some sticks in the way. Just couldn't get a shot. Unfortunately, she harvested it, and I took, like say, a 163. So we're clearly making progress.
And are
But
you?
you know this, and I think Mississippi State's done wonderful world at this. So when you improve the habitat,
Yep.
you can only make gains in that deer herd so far because you're still with the deer that were stressed out from low quality habitat.
Exactly. Yep.
And not to be crude at all, but let's say, my wife and I adopt a baby from Ethiopia, and it's from a mom that was on drugs and malnourished. And we love that kid, and just that kid's won God's lottery, and it's awesome. But it may never express its full potential because it had poor prenatal health. There's a lot about prenatal health,
Absolutely.
right? Well, the same is true in a deer herd. So our deer were eating, rocks and hickory nuts, as I like to say. Deer don't eat hickory nuts, folks, but kind of hungry. And so we're adding food, but we're just improving deer that were starving or in bad shape. And we're 3 or 4 generations from seeing the potential.
Exactly.
And work at Mississippi State has done a phenomenal job of demonstrating this and showing it various ways, improving work, or taking deer from coastal barrier islands up to their deer pens and feeding them a good ratio and all this stuff. So
yeah, it's generations to be able to show that full possible expression.
So I said earlier, I love working in low quality habitat because you can make a 10% change pretty easily. Get some food plots, kill some trees, do some burning, whatever's appropriate for that property. Maybe get them a year or two older.
Yeah.
You can make a change pretty quickly, but to see the real potential of a property is a long-term effort.
Yeah. So Grant, one of the things that we've had conversations here recently, and it's been everything from ag land to, I kind of have my own proving grounds in Eastern Kentucky. I bought it for the similar ways that you are. My wife went to school there. I love the area. It was cheap land, right? One of the things that we're seeing there in some of these other places is what I would consider very low deer populations, right? Like that county historically for the last, I think 7 years has harvested no more than 120 deer, of which less than 30 of those have been does. So for me as a deer guy, right, thinking about, improving habitat and deer's reproduction rates, I'm looking at and thinking, man, it really seems like these populations should be higher, right? They should be bouncing back, but we're not seeing it. And we've heard a lot of people talking about this in areas that I would expect are better deer population areas. And now they're like, hey, listen, like I'm not seeing deer here. We're not necessarily shooting does.
In your area, I mean, obviously you had low deer populations to start. You said like, hey, we didn't hunt this for 5 years. On this 900 acres, did you have similar experiences there?
No, it was lower, but there were deer here because this big developed area where
Right.
there's no hunting. And again, on one side, more or less, and the proving grounds, original proving grounds on the other side, there were deer here.
Yeah.
And I'm okay here on my property with lower deer densities. I look at that as I need enough does to have enough fawns to get with natural mortality rates or whatever, that's going to vary depending on site, to get me an adequate number of 5-year-old bucks to chase and have fun with.
Yep.
I'm not worried about total numbers. I kind of look at it as, okay, facetious numbers, easy math. If we start with 10 male fawns and you have a annual natural roadkill, coyote, whatever natural is, mortality rate of pick your number where you are, 10, 20, 30%.
Yep.
How many are going to live to be 5 years old?
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be really depend on your neighborhood, right? Because your neighbors maybe have my dad hunting there, and if it's brown, it's down. You got to kind of take it all in consideration, and that's how I tend to manage deer herds. It's what's the landowner's objectives, realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the tougher parts of my job is sometimes they don't have realistic objectives, and you have to kind of help them rephrase it. We do this before we ever accept a job or turn the job down because they're never going to be satisfied with you.
Yeah.
So we go through a lot of that. So at my place, I like to chase 4 or 5-year-old bucks. And if you're chasing 5-year-old bucks, you're going to have occasional 6 or 7 or might be lucky, someone slides through there. So I look at it that way.
Okay.
That's an interesting way to think about it. Like in terms of, I don't think we've ever looked at it that way.
Mm-mm.
Like, so in essence, how I'm hearing what you're saying there is like, well, I want to have 5-year-old deer to shoot. And so I need to consider the mortality rate and support enough deer that, it's never a guarantee, but so that you'll have that many. Is that,
excess deer are just taken away from your end objective.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so we never know a buck's potential. Lots of research at Mississippi State, and Mickey Hellickson's work and other great guys' work have shown that we really can't judge a deer by phenotypic expression. And we put GPS collars on deer, and lots of people put a lot more on deer. It may be a spike and it ends up being a Boone and Crockett, whatever. My culling is when they're 4 or 5 years old, depending on that's when I cull. I don't ever cull before that because you just don't know.
Yeah. Right.
So does are taking groceries away and causing stress through breeding. We know bucks lose about 30% of their body weight during the rut. More does you have. I call it the rut diet. If you want to lose weight, percent less, and you will rut diet. Just walk 20% more a day, eat 20% less, and you will lose weight. This is biologically fact.
Yeah.
Well, that's what bucks do during the rut. So it's very, and that takes a 200-pound buck, either live or gutted, whatever you're doing, to a 140-pound deer.
Wow.
That's significant.
Yeah.
That's the cost of reproduction. So the tighter you get that adult sex ratio, or even skew it a little bit towards males, you're reducing that stress level on bucks, especially young bucks. If you've got a surplus of more mature deer out there, the pheromones in the environment are probably, it's tough to measure all this stuff, but most people believe, Carl Miller and others, that those pheromones, external hormones, are suppressing the rutting behavior of younger bucks. Therefore, they're not losing weight. They don't have to recover as much, and they're a much better 2, 3, 4-year-old because they didn't go through that stress level.
Yep.
And you're saying, Grant, the way to achieve that is by having more bucks than does, by reducing the doe number?
Yeah, and less does, right? You reduce that length of the breeding behavior and the stress by having less does to compete for.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I would think that, like, if you do that, so, what that looks like is shoot more does.
Yes.
Won't they leave the property and go breed other does? And I would think that would create more stress.
That's probably the most common question among hunters about the rut, but research clearly shows that deer, especially as they get older, have a greater fidelity to their home range.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Winky and others have killed Mark Drury and me. I like hunting 7-year-old deer because they're got typically more pattern bone. They're going to live on 200 acres or 150 acres or something.
Sure. And
as long as you don't bust them, you got a real good chance of harvesting that deer.
Mm-hmm.
Those 3-year-olds probably, doing more. But I think it's human thoughts, not to be crude at all. Boy, that big stud bucks running the county, breeding all the does. Just the opposite's true. As they get older and more mature, their number one goal is survival. You know that by testing corticosteroid levels in deer, the stress hormone. And so they go to an area where they haven't been before. Those stress hormones are going up. They don't know where the coyote dens are, the hunter stands are, or whatever. So if the old buck is not going through a county trying to breed the does, the research does not point that way at all. It points just the opposite. And what you do is you get a soldier and you got, doe here and buck here, and they overlap 10% or 20%. And he happens to overlap with her when she's got that magic perfume on. So she goes over here and he'll go over here, and it'll be a zigzag pattern on GPS. And 24 to 36 hours later, it's a straight line back. And the interpretation is no one's talking to you. Hey, what'd you think, man? No one's talking to the deer. But the interpretation is I can't wait to get back to my core area because I know I'm safe.
Right. Less stress.
Well, what about like competition between bucks? Does that create stress in a similar fashion?
I think it's like a lot of things. I mean, probably none of us, you guys are big guys, but none of us are going to argue with Mike Tyson, right?
Yeah.
We're just not going to do that.
Right.
So if you've got really dominant bucks out there, that is suppressing, that's what I'm talking about earlier, suppressing these young bucks.
Yeah.
And they're not wasting all this energy.
Yeah.
And they're not getting injured in the fight.
Yep.
You don't want, I'm old, maybe there's better, newer boxers or whatever, but you don't want, no one wants Mike Tyson, touch them on the nose. You just don't want that. So that big old giant buck and that young buck comes out. You see this, you guys hunt a lot, and that young buck will get in a submissive posture pretty quick.
Yep.
And that's, I believe, the natural way to prevent injury. When you get, and a lot of guys in Texas went through this way back in the day, the late 80s, early 90s, when all this was starting and people were letting deer get older, they're having a lot of buck mortality because the age classes were all the same, and they were fighting like crazy.
Yep.
Now that you have a very good, natural, dominant age structure, you've got some 7-year-olds, some 6-year-olds, some 5-year-olds, those 3-year-olds learn to mind their manners. They don't want to get injured.
That's super interesting. And so you're right. That is one of the biggest, probably misconceptions or ideas is that, guys think, well, I have, the does, and so I'm going to pull in all the bucks on you're saying that's generally not what's happening.
At the Proving Grounds 1, doe harvest was not a big thing in southern Missouri. I've been called a lot of names, and we would kill 70 does a year off 1,500 acres, which was considered a slaughter.
Yeah.
Right? And my bucks were not leaving my place. And I don't think a single deer had a home range that centered on my property. Your neighbors killed big deer. A lot of my neighbors killed their biggest deer in their life about 5, 6 years, 7 years after we started doing this, which is fine. But we were always killing big deer. We made a show on it. We were successful at doing this, even though we were losing bucks, because those deer have tremendous fidelity. And we would create bedding areas on steep slopes or the wind swirls. That's where deer want to bed. They don't want to bed in that flat area. They want to be where the wind's swirling.
Yep.
So where I can't hunt is where I want the deer bedding.
Sure.
I don't want them bedding in my prime hunting area, but I want to be able to hunt 75 yards away, so they're getting there. Another thing a lot of hunters get backwards, I think, not being mean. I did too. I've been Bubba forever. But morning is a deer's night. They've worked all night or all day. They're coming home from their work shift and going to bed.
Yep.
Hunters get this backwards. And evening is our afternoon hunts is a deer's morning.
Right.
Yep.
They're getting up, they're stretching around. Hey, I'm going to give me a snack before I go to work. That's where those hidey old food plots really work out good. I want to be 75 yards away from the bedding area, and I want to be hunting the best food source. There's always that people forget. It's not the best food source. It's the best food source deer do not associate with danger.
Yep.
And we noticed from all Carl Miller and other people's work in the South that deer learn, especially mature deer, learn to avoid feeders quickly and only use them at night because they associate that area with danger.
Yeah.
Sure.
Even if your feeder isn't getting hunting, your neighbors, if it's legal, your neighbors are feeding and they're hunting the heck out of it. They wore out the 4-wheeler trail to their blind 30 yards away from the feeder. And deer learn to associate feeders with danger, so they go there at night because they never have that danger at night.
HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Spartan Forge.
Dude, maps. Mapping, right?
Yeah.
It all starts with a map, a visualization of a new property, into the fine tuning of different food plots, different habitat projects, where those are going to go, all the way to sharing pins and looking kind of like beyond the layers with something like a LiDAR, which is exclusive to Spartan Forge as of now.
Yeah, and whether we're looking at it from a management side to put in food plots or switchgrass, or if we're taking a run and gun public approach on Kansas, it all starts with a map. It starts with a strategy there. You and I are going to have our own Blue Force team, which will allow us to run our own devices, but be able to see what you're adding or what I'm adding to that single map, which is really going to be critical moving forward this hunting season.
That's right. So if you're looking for a mapping software to try out this year, or maybe you're just like not getting what you need out of the one you're using currently, Bill's offered us a promo code of HUNTR20, HUNTR20, that you guys can use to get your own subscription up and rolling. Check out Spartan Forge, download the app, use that promo code, and we'll be using that this year.
Make sure you check out Spartan Forge.
Well, the doe harvesting is really applicable because I think Jeremy and I are constantly looking for the right answer and trying to apply that to our property year to year. And so, like, for instance, we shot 15 does off of our property in Ohio last year. And like some of our guys were like, I don't know, that seems like a lot. I'm like, well, I don't think it's that many,
It's 1,000 acres.
And really, we don't know. In fairness, like, I haven't done a thermal drone survey. I haven't done like a formal camera survey. I'm just looking at observation in terms of like how many bucks and does we think are there, and then really at the end of the day, do I have food left through the end of the season? And
Yes.
I do. So I mean, what's the right way? I mean, what's the right way on a year-to-year basis? I mean, how do you pick a number of how many does to shoot?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do that. Every area is different. Maybe 150 deer per square mile in parts of Iowa and 30 in an all closed camping forest. I mean, this is highly variable.
Sure.
But probably the best tool, and I wrote some of the chapters in Kitty Mae's book on camera surveys. I mean, I love numbers and playing with deer and all that, but as I've matured through my career, the most important thing to me, number one thing, is having more food than deer in the 2 stress periods.
Mm-hmm.
So utilization cages in food plots and in native vegetation. People always forget the native vegetation, which is usually, unless you're in ag country, the biggest component of the property.
Right.
But utilization cages to monitor, boy, is my crop 6 inches tall, but in the cage is 3 feet tall, then you got too many does, and deer are stressed. And remember, each inch, if this is whatever great browse you got on your property, each inch you go down is usually less nutritious.
Mm-hmm.
So you may go, boy, my field's still green, I got plenty of food, but do you have high quality food?
Right.
'Cause deer, you've seen this, deer don't just stand like cattle do. They don't just enter a bean field and eat that bean to the ground and go on. They're walking over a bean field eating leaf by leaf. They're called concentrate selectors. They eat the best and leave the rest.
Mm-hmm.
But the best today, the best tomorrow may be a lower quality than the best today.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got, whatever, brand day deer food out there, whatever it is, and it's green come January, but it's 3 inches tall. I will argue that is not ample food. That's low quality food. I want some tall food out there where they're still eating high quality stuff.
What about, soybeans are my biggest. So like, we don't have to go too specific, but like the property that I'm having the most success on is in Ohio, and I've got a central grain food source. It's 7 acres of soybeans planted at 150 pounds per acre. They're stacked in there. And I have surrounding green food sources. So let's say, 3 acre to acre and a half brassica food plots with some rye and stuff in there, and then some surrounding clover plots like your hidey hole plots and stuff like that. And it seems to be doing really well. Like by my perception, it's like, hey, I have clover left over every year. The rye pops like in December, January, and there are pods left on the beans. The brassicas seem to be the most susceptible. Like they get crushed, especially on a drought year. Like they get set back in September. I don't have exclosure cages. I assume that's probably something I should do, but so in the past I've looked and said, hey, I have pods on the beans in March, I'm good.
So I think it would probably be interesting for you to put a cage out there in your bean field. Are those pods the last 20%, the ones that aren't really palatable?
I don't know.
Deer aren't eating anyway? Or is it even browse pressure across the whole field, or is it one corner they never touched? I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of, pseudo look at this.
Okay.
but make sure it's not just a 20 or 30% lowest quality pods left. You want, again, quality food. I did some work in New Zealand, wonderful people. I just finished my PhD. Trace and I want to go to New Zealand. That's where biology started from anyway. And we got the plane, and I called ahead, and they raised deer commercially. They obviously have whitetails. They were moved from Delaware, New Jersey in 1945. It's a really cool study. You go from northern hemisphere to southern hemisphere, so messes up antler shedding, breeding cycles, all that kind of stuff. And I'll be really honest, I was probably cocky, just finished my PhD, a little too cocky. And 30 minutes off that plane, I learned shut up and be quiet, because these people know more about deer than anyone in America by far from a nutritional point of view. And they were breeding these plants that are what we know as brassicas now. That was not a big thing back then.
Right.
That's how biologic got started.
Yep.
And all these different things. And they talked about it's not just green, and not just protein, it's calcium, phosphorus, all these different things. And they grazed in what's called paddocks, and they were doing mob grazing for anyone in the States was ever thinking about. And they moved that fence. These are captive deer raised for meat and antlers, 10 meters a day, 10 meters a day, 10 meters a day. And they always want these deer for maximum production, maximum meat production, maximum antler production. By the way, everyone thinks antlers are just for aphrodisiacs. Antlers are one of the fastest growing tissues known to man. They're used a lot in cancer research and a lot of other research things. So they want maximum antler production. They're not worried about score. They're worried about kilograms, what we call pounds per deer. And they want those on fresh forage every day to maximize growth. And then they fence behind them. Usually the deer don't want to go back anyway, but they fence behind them so that can regrow fresh forage. So what I'm asking you is, are you still green? You don't have to answer, but something to think about.
Sure.
Are you still green at the end of the winter, or do you have fresh forage out there? Because there's a difference, and you want to kill the biggest deer you can. And just something to think about on your property. I don't know your property, not trying to give you any advice, but it's just something to think about.
Well, I'm trying to get advice. So, well, my question there is, Grant, the brassicas that I'm planting are they're never green by the end of
They're gone.
November. Well, I assumed they were dying, like natural cycle of the plant. I guess they're getting eaten too. I'm not running exclosure cages on them. How long are brassicas supposed to stay green?
There's brassicas is a real generic term. There's hundreds of species of brassicas. Some will stay bitter till real late. They probably last you through the winter. One thing in general, I applaud you for planting all these different things because they're maturing at different times, different low proteins, whatever. But blends of plants will always outperform any monoculture for many, many reasons. So a blend with beans will always produce more total tonnage, not bean pods, than a single field of beans. And you got to plant a single field of beans if your combine is a John Deere or Case or whatever. My combine's a 10-pointer. I'm growing food for deer. So blends will always produce more for many, many reasons, different root structures, different rooting depths. This research is really clear on this. This is ag research, not wildlife research. Blends are much better for conserving moisture than monocultures or single species. But we think about deer hunters, we all want that magic bean, right? We want something that's inexpensive, that's really drought tolerant, but it can grow if its feet are wet, that deer love to eat, but they don't kill it by over browsing on it. That's really code tolerant. There is no magic bean. So the closest we get to a magic bean is a blend. And you have a plant like buckwheat, very simple plant, that is known to pull phosphorus out of soil more than other plants. Sunflowers pull more zinc. Zinc's one of those really critical micronutrients for deer. Sunflowers pull more zinc than any other plant known. So blends have helped me take the county record at my place here. Two counties. Again, counties in Missouri are very big. They're laid out unlike eastern counties. So the furthest point of a county, a man should be able to get to the county seat on a one-day horseback ride, or 15 miles. That's what's considered horseback ride, literally. So 30-mile square, more or less, rivers, whatever, 30-mile square counties, more or less. Pretty big counties, less square miles. And again, the county line splits mine. And when I started this, the biggest deer ever recorded, and I'm not saying all deer were recorded, but back in the day, you killed a big deer, pretty good chance you recorded it, was a 131. No change in genetics, low fence, neighbors, and we're harvested 170 gross deer.
Yep.
No change in genetics, just habitat and letting deer express more of their potential.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a little side here, a great line is Missouri's a great state. There's a lot of states have this lesson, but Missouri's a great one. They didn't get many deer out of state when they're doing the restoration or restocking deer. And where I did my master's, Drury and Mincy, and then Peck Ranch and Gainesville or Caney Mountain were 3 wildlife refuges where there were residual deer populations. And that's basically where the Missouri deer herd was restocked.
Mm-hmm.
These are, small 120-inch hill deer with nothing, again, rocks and hickory nuts. They put them up in northern Missouri where there's really good food and better soils and grow world-class deer. There was not a genetic change at all.
Right.
It's just a grocery change.
Well, again, looking for advice. What would be? It sounds like exclosure cages are a necessity to know what you got.
It's good for a lot of reasons. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's no possible way of understanding the impact that a deer herd has on that food plot until you keep them out of it.
Well, maybe where I was mistaken was because, like I said, I look at my soybean field. I say, hey, there's beans when I'm, stuff's greening up here at the very end of the year. But what you're saying is, hey, maybe that's just it's low quality, forage. Maybe maybe I
Crack
don't
those
have it.
pods open in January and taste them. They're not going to hurt you. Taste them, eat them.
Sure.
And if they're really bitter tasting, that's why deer didn't eat it. Deer are finicky. They're really finicky. Getting their concentrate selectors.
Yep.
And are they all wrinkly, little shriveled up beans in there? Are they? Yeah. Again, you're out early season. You watch a deer walk out to a Midwestern bean field. They don't just stop and put their head down. They eat this leaf. They eat that leaf. They eat this leaf. They walk around. They're very selective feeders. You think about an elk or a cow, great big wide muzzle. They're grass eaters. Just give it to me.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about elk and cattle like a jet. A jet can burn kerosene or jet fuel or gas. The only difference is how much weight it can carry.
Right.
It's just a combustion. Well, that's a cow or an elk. They're grass eaters. Deer don't have the same bacteria in their gut, and they can't digest grass. They can't break down the lignin content of grass, the stuff in the cell walls that makes grass stand up straight. So they like, new cells that are soft and squishy, don't have that lignin content. They're very picky. And then they also have a very natural instinct to eat what they need at that moment, that day. And for example, you probably know this weed. There's a weed in Pennsylvania. It's here, Queen Anne's lace.
Oh, yeah.
It's an exotic. And I never knew. I was never taught, never knew deer ate it. Never, just, it's just a weed. It's not real aggressive. Don't worry about it. And I just happened to have a trail cam. I was trying to pattern this buck for a season on a trail where it's crossing a road, an interior road. And my target buck crosses that. It's in video mode. And there's a Queen Anne's lace there and just chomp, chomp, chomp. Takes 3 great big leaves off the Queen Anne's lace. And I happened to get that video. And the next day I go out there and go, oh my gosh. I thought I discovered something really cool, So I take the next 3 leaves from the plant right next to it. They're the same height, same shape.
Yep.
More or less probably the same quality. I don't know. Send them to a lab. And it turns out at that time of year, right early season, when bucks are still chowing down for calcium here in Missouri, September 15th, Queen Anne's lace is extremely high in calcium.
Interesting.
And as far as I know, the only time of year deer eat Queen Anne's lace, I've never even noticed browse on that plant before, is that time of year when they need calcium. And that just tells me how selective they are.
They just know. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the big thing. And some of the early stuff that you had done, Grant, like even around the, like soybeans maturing, like, people were looking at green beans. Well, some of your research when you were taking forage samples in June and July and August to see the nutritional changes, and visually, right, it doesn't look like the bean's changing at all, right? It's growing, it's getting bigger, whatever, deer are still eating it. But when you look at those forage samples, the dramatic changes throughout the summer months as it gets closer to hunting season is like, clearly those deer are treating those beans differently in those different months as part of their nutrition.
And there's not as many resources available right as you're going through the growing season or in the hunting season. So if you take a leaf off the bottom of a bean plant, it almost always tests way lower quality than a brand new leaf off the top of a bean plant.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in Illinois, there's not hardly any native browse. Deer have already browsed that off, right? The woods got a browse line everywhere in Illinois. There's nothing but crop fields in a lot of parts of Illinois.
Yep.
Deer eat what's there. And it's still pretty good quality. And they do great. Obviously, no one goes, well, I don't want to hunt Illinois. I mean, it's doing great, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you go where there's pretty good native vegetation, I've seen this. I've seen deer back off what look like great quality beans to go eat native vegetation because those beans start hardening off a little bit. Not detectable to the eye, but on forage samples, very detectable.
Mm-hmm.
So diversity is key if you're not hunting a big bean field in an ag state. Diversity of your habitat is key so they can get what they want at the day they want it.
Yeah.
And that comes from, sunlight hitting the ground and prescribed fire, stuff like that.
So Grant, when you were in New Zealand and you were watching these forage tests and kind of the patterns that these guys were using, I mean, again, like at that point, nobody here had heard about brassicas or planting them for, they were greens. If you're down south, like, grandma was cooking them type of thing. So, yeah. I mean, as you're watching it, what is coming to mind as you're seeing or hearing these guys do this to say, this should be applicable where we're at?
I met two guys, brilliant scientists, brilliant guys from Wrightson Unlimited, the big seed company in New Zealand. New Zealand's a big grazing area. That company's long since been bought out by another company. And these were brilliant guys, but knew nothing about wild free range deer.
Okay.
It's funny. I had them up to my place in Missouri. They could not understand the concept of anyone planting a plot without fences to regulate how much deer were eating on a day. They could never get there. That was so foreign to them. But they talked to me about the maturity level of these plants. And even back in the day when I was doing biologic work, doesn't matter if you do, but if you remember, even on our brassica blends, we'd have 5 or 6 different species or cultivars. These were,
right.
Bred plants in there, never just one. So they'd mature at different times or offer different nutrients. Some were bulb producers to A, to till the soil, B, to provide those late season carbs, and some were only producing forage. There was a lot of thought that went into those things.
Yeah.
And Mossy Oak had the ability to market that in, again, Bubba terms to, drive sales way, way up there. I was a geeky scientist working with the people at Wrights and do that, but they understood, and this is one of the biggest things they taught me. And still today, I tell people this, they look at me like, boy, that guy had never left the university system. Deer don't digest hardly anything. They consume it. And the microbes do all the digestion. So what the brilliant farmers and researchers in New Zealand would do, they would have petri dishes of microbes they'd extracted from a rumen. You anesthetize a deer, cut a hole in there, put the glass caps, you can actually reach in the rumen, pull stuff out. It's pretty cool. A lot of dairy research agencies do this. And then put that in petri dishes and see which plants produced just off gases or which plants produce more beneficial microbes, because that's what the deer actually, for a big part, digest. Those microbes reproduce by the billions per second. And it's called sloughing. They die and they go through the hindgut or the colon and intestines. And those are assimilated into proteins and stuff like that and then digested.
Okay.
So you're feeding the microbes in a deer's gut. You're not feeding the deer. You're feeding the microbes. And that's where biologic really kicked off big time, because we were using plants designed to feed those microbes. Or not designed, but selected is a better term.
Right.
To feed those microbes. And I got hung up on that for probably too long. And, blackberry leaves and, partridge tree and greenbrier and whatever. A lot of these things do the same thing. And deer will, if you have a big, really diverse habitat, deer will select what they need on that day, literally on that day.
Yeah.
And if you're in southern Iowa and there's bean fields and overgrazed forests, you're eating beans. You're eating beans tomorrow, today, and the next day.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the interesting part about it is, like, obviously, people that watch a deer feed, especially from bed to a destination, right? They're just eating, snipping the whole way, right? Just constantly picking and moving. But, as you start to look at, or as food plot guys, as we start to think about it, like, we're trying to provide tonnage. We want highly attractive things. And a lot of that, I think, and maybe this is where it's changed over even the last 10 years, is like, for a lot of us, we did that because it was like, this is an attraction plot. I can set up here. I can have access here. I can kill a deer here. Somewhere along the line, we also said, well, we're going to provide all this nutrition. And I think there's still probably a disconnect there in people thinking, like, by planting a half-acre food plot, what that's going to do nutritionally to impact the herd versus all of the native habitat and everything else that this deer is going to eat, right? And I don't know, there's a lot of information out there,
But guys still today will say, well, I planted this half-acre food plot. It's great. And it's like, you realize how much a deer is going to eat throughout the day versus what you see them eating in that food plot.
Absolutely. Deer eat, depending on which school or which paper you believe, but somewhere around 3 to 5% of their body weight a day. That's dry weight. So again, simple math, 100-pound deer needs about 5 pounds a day dry weight. That's all the moisture taken out. They're going to respirate out. Deer salivate about 2 gallons a day. A matured cow salivates about 30 gallons a day.
Wow.
These critters need a lot of water.
Gross.
And they get a lot of that through, you ever been around cattle? They're always drooling. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Cattle are always drooling.
Slobbering. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's because they're regurgitating, masticating, or chewing up that food so the microbes have more surface area to work on that.
Yep.
Once you understand the biology, it's really simple. So green soybeans are, about 70, in a lot of variables, they're drought, whatever, but about 70% water.
Wow.
So bottom line is they're going to have to eat 13, 15 pounds of beans to get the 5 pounds they need for a 100-pound doe. So you can do some math real easy and say, okay, again, just easy math, folks. Don't apply this to your land. You got 100 deer on your property. You need 5 pounds a day. You need 500 pounds of forage. That doesn't seem like much until you go, deer are really selective. And I'm walking through this timber, and I got about 40 pounds of food per acre year round.
Yeah.
That's why the deer leave your property or eating on your neighbor's land too or whatever. You want to make your place. I tell people all the time, I want your property to be the Waffle House and the Hampton Inn.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want. And if you're making your property the Waffle House and the Hampton Inn, and you have marginal hunting skills, it's going to work out great for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Grant, how big of an impact do you think the social dynamic of a deer herd has, like when weighted against the nutrition element?
Oh, nutrition wins.
Yeah.
You can take, and Mississippi State's done this, they can take deer off coastal plain island, and I don't remember the data. You may know, Jeremy, 80-pound deer, 100-pound deer, so coastal plain deer, really small deer. What all the Yankees call, boy, look at that shepherd dog. That deer looks like a shepherd dog meter, so small, right? And take them up to the pen and probably use some ivermectin or get the parasites out of them and feed them good groceries and keep the coyotes away, whatever. And in a couple of generations, they look like giant Iowa deer.
Yep.
Exact same genetics. So nutrition is huge. I think all the scientists I know, certainly Damaris and Miller and whatever, nutrition's number one. Age structure, you got to have age structure, right? 1.5 years old buck can be big, but it can only be so big. The world record deer, the Hansen deer. I remember one year the deer study group, the guy marketing the Hansen buck back when I was really popular bought the jawbone, and they put Kroll and Marston and Miller, I think Joe Hamilton, myself, in different corners of the room, and had us all age it independently. Now this is wear and replacement. I'm not saying it's accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But not me, but the other guys, pretty smart guys, right? And they all come up at 3.5 years old. I believe the Hansen buck was 3.5 years old.
Yep.
And you get those superstar bucks. There was a deer killed just outside of Nashville a couple years ago that was 267 or something like that, and was, depending on who you believe, 2 or 3 years old. I mean, you get those superstar bucks.
Mm-hmm.
They just never make it because they look so good at 2 or 3. We never see them at 5 because they get lead poisoning before they ever get 5.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But nutrition's number one. Here at the Proving Grounds, nutrition, food plots, big part, native vegetation, and creating bedding areas. Some people like to use the term sanctuary. I just want something thick and gnarly that I don't want to walk through.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. I get,
and I do hunt these quote unquote sanctuaries. I mean, during the rut, does like to get in real thicket to keep those pesky bucks from beating them up all the time. I'll hunt the thickest, gnarly stuff during the rut because you don't want to hunt the big open field where you see 20 does afternoon, because does tend to, when they become receptive, tend to drop their fawns or separate from their fawns. I'm sure it's a survival mechanism for the fawns, and go off by themselves before the prom starts.
Mm-hmm.
So you're hunting that field with 20 does out there. That's probably not where the doe with the fancy perfume is.
Yeah.
You want to be in the thicket.
Yep.
So we use that technique very successfully. And I want the best quality food I can have, and then I want cover, and age structure is just a given. You got to have age structure if you want bigger antlered bucks. You got to have.
Yep.
Sure.
Agree. Well, Grant, what's this season looking like for you? What do you guys got on the horizon? You already started in Missouri, so
September 15th. I've been hunting some, traveling a lot. Daniel killed a really nice deer we call Ranger the other day. I think it was a mainframe 9, maybe 10 or 12 points total. Really nice deer, great 20-yard shot. That shot we dream of, broadside. Made a great shot. And I'm kind of stuck on chasing this old buck Lucky, and I'll ride that out of ways, and I'll get impatient because he whips me again, and I'll chase another more mature deer. But Lucky's kind of my target deer right now, and I'll spend a lot of time chasing Lucky, and he's winning the chess match right now.
And do you guys have a target for does that you're going to try to take this year on that?
We will. I think we took 17, if I remember right, last year, 900 acres, and we need to take more. It's never, for me, it's always relative. So our food plots got blitzed pretty hard in that late winter stress period of time.
Yep.
And I'm in an acorn-driven environment, so you could have a great acorn year and think, boy, I don't need to harvest any does because they're just buried in their own acorns. You don't want to be faked out by that.
Yeah.
So we need to take, if we had 17 and that's not enough, let's set a goal for 25, whether that's 24, 26. I'm not,
Sure.
No one can manage that precisely, but we need to take more than we did last year.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know about you, but we're seeing red oaks in our area are just raining like crazy right now.
Yeah, we had a pretty good acorn crop, but we're in a big drought, so they're dropping early, which tells me food plots can be critical in that late season. They're stressed out, they're dropping early.
I think so too.
Yeah,
I think it's like a pseudo. Those red oaks shouldn't be dropping yet, frankly, and the white oaks didn't drop anything.
Yep.
So they're going to clear out them red oaks, and then the food plots are going to be critical,
crushing them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that seems critical.
And I'm still that guy. I mean, I still get a little doe fever when that big nanny doe starts walking toward me. I'm not going, oh my gosh, I got to kill another doe. I still enjoy it, and we have interns. There's no problem either us using the meat or someone on a team or community using the meat. So, I like flinging arrows.
I agree, man.
Me too. I'm ready.
Yeah, me too. Well, Grant, we appreciate it, man. Thanks for spending some time with us this morning and just catching up. It's always good to get to talk and catch up and see how things going. I think people will really enjoy kind of hearing the background and the startup of on this, and then obviously, following up with how things are going to go this season for sure. And I'm glad things are going well, and Tracy's doing well. Did she get to shed hunt that property last year? I know that's kind of been her thing, was out shed hunting.
My wife's a huge shed hunter, and her best shed dog passed away. Unfortunately, the dog now is the dumbest lab we've ever had by far. Great house dog, great dog, but that thing, I've never seen a lab where you throw the ball twice and it's done. It just lay there like, I ain't chasing that thing again. But no, Tracy's big shed hunter. I think her record year here in the Ozarks now, not traveling here, was 60 some odd sheds.
Wow,
her record year.
That's amazing.
So and she, to be honest, it's a little bit of a little thing in our marriage because she's kind of competitive about it. We talked about competition earlier, so it's got to the point she gets a little testy. So you find a shed, you're out working or something, find a shed, you're like, now do I leave it, or is a coyote gonna get it? Because it'd be mama's not happy, no one's happy type deal. She'll be happier if she finds that shed than I will.
Yeah.
Or do I pick it up and know she's going to shed and toss it out where I know she's going? We're kind of playing that game now. But no, we really like shed hunting and trapping. I'll end with one last funny. I think trapping's critical. No doubt, Missouri does scent station work every year and keeps a lot of records. So we know our coon population is just doing this. I mean, this is unquestionable.
Yep.
Turkey population's doing that. There's, that's not cause and effect, but it sure looks pretty suspicious. And so we trap a lot. And one year, being the big macho man, like when I was a kid, had my Yukon trap line, I caught a bunch of coons, 67, I think, and 7 coyotes. I put the coyote around the edge. I had a super king-size blanket made, coyote on the edge and coon in the middle. Going to give it to her for Christmas. While I was feeling all, like the provider, this is not crude at all. And give it to her at Christmas. No family's touching it. It's like a big fur coat, right? I mean, it's pretty cool. It's actually.
No.
So that night we whip it out on the bed and we're going to go to bed and I'm feeling like, the big provider. And like in 2 minutes, we're both kicking that thing out. It's too hot, man. You got to be Nanook up north to sleep on that thing. It become wall art. It's never been used again as a blanket. You can't sleep under it.
Yeah. Maybe if you got to be up in like the Arctic Circle for needing something like that.
Yeah. But I appreciate the great work you all are doing and for letting me be your guest. Apologize for all the rabbit holes I went down.
Oh, man, no, it's an honor to have you on, and we appreciate you just being able to share. I mean, that's kind of our whole point here is we just love hearing everybody's passion. Everybody's kind of got a different way of how they got into it and what drives them. And, obviously we've known each other for a long time, Grant, and I've really considered you an arm's reach mentor for a lot of the stuff that I've done throughout my my career, and just appreciate you doing what you do and being truthful and honest, and
well, and for guys in my generation, like, I'm not just blowing smoke, like it really was a cornerstone for what maybe not what lit the fire, but it's like we were, I'm 31 years old and I was hungry in college to learn, and I had a property that I could do some stuff on, and so it was a very big part of my becoming the land manager that I am today. So thank you for that.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
So, all right, Grant. Well, we appreciate it, man. We'd love to have you on back sometime, and we wish you the best this season, and be safe.
Thanks, guys. You too. I hope you have a great season. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity.
HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Pure Wildlife Blends.
Yeah, buddy. We're doing a lot of food plots this year. It seems like the planning, the preparation, like the coordinating for getting everything, in the ground, it's like it just never ends.
Yeah, and I just got off an 18-hour bender where I'm on multiple farms getting everything ready. But this year, fortunately, we've got Pure Wildlife Blends, which is Jeff Sturgis. Who better to partner with for our food plot program than a guy who's got 30 years of experience, been on thousands of farms. I mean, the guy lives and breathes food plots.
Yeah, and so the blends themselves are all handpicked by Jeff, and it's like, man, we've had a lot of conversations with him over the years, and he's been pretty influential in how we set up farms and stuff. And frankly, the product, it's in the name, it's Pure Wildlife Blend. So a lot of these other seeds that you see that are blue and orange or all these things, it's because they're coated with lime and they're dyed, and it's marketing at the end of the day. So we have a lot of confidence in the seeds that Jeff has chose, and that's what we're going to be planting this year. And so right now, you can use code HUNTR10 for 10% off anything on the website.
So if you're looking for switch, clover, brassica, or Jeff's favorite, layer in the rye.
Layer in the rye.
Yep, check out purewildlifeblends.com.
Awesome. Very cool.
Cool. Yeah, it's always good, obviously, to talk to Grant, but just kind of hearing that development and stuff, and like I don't think people realize like how bad that land was in shape at the proving grounds when he got it.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I didn't realize, like, 5 years of no hunting. None. And it's 1,500 acres. You're like, oh, well, it's 1,500 acres. Like, I get, okay, maybe you don't hunt. 5 years of no hunting, just trying to build some sort of deer back on that place.
Yeah.
And obviously we've watched him over how many years here, develop and work and build the habitat up and add food plots. And, it just takes time. I think we kind of got in a groove there and definitely hit a point around like the deer numbers standpoint. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, talking about like, I'm just trying to get these deer to be 5, and like, I don't need, 100 deer. I just need X amount, and then those surviving through the levels to get to 5 years old. And when you start talking about, nutritional stress and trying to keep food around and just even keeping them, what I would say, protected, right? Like having food and security cover so that they don't leave and get shot somewhere else. Like a limited amount of deer is better than a lot of deer, which goes against what most hunters think, right? Like most hunters go out and they sit and they want to see a bunch of deer. That's just how it's been. But in reality, and that's the thing I've kind of had this turmoil with on my Kentucky place, is like even last year, I planted 8 acres of corn, and I had some alfalfa and clover, and it's like come like April was like the deer didn't even eat like half of the food. Well, there just wasn't a lot of deer there. But I guess if I'm just trying to get those deer year after year till they get to 5, like who cares?
Yeah, who cares? Well, yeah, I mean, it's like as not to belittle knowledge or the science, but because obviously there's a lot of intricacies of like the different of their stomachs and understanding this and that. But like if you really dumb it down, and Bubba Easy was saying, like it's not rocket science. Like they got to eat is kind of the main thing. They got to eat, they got to have water, and they got to have cover, and they got to stay alive. They got to not get shot. So I mean, if you can give them that, as long as there is the potential for or they live there, which they do, and almost everywhere, in the Midwest and east of here and stuff, you can build a deer herd, which is really cool. I mean, he's obviously done it at maybe the grandest scale that we know of, but I mean, we can even see it on some of our properties. And really the struggle is the last part, whether it's us or our guys or neighbors shooting them. And you have different, obviously we talk a lot about the baiting and different things that make them more easy to kill, frankly. It can have a really big impact. It can almost void all of the other stuff. It's like you might have plenty of food, you might have plenty of cover and this and that, but if they're getting sucked out and shot or whatever, then they're not there anymore. It kind of resets it. But
yeah, that's the hardest. And obviously most people, if you're dealing with a 40 acre or 80 acre tract, like that's common. And the reality is you're not going to keep those deer protected and on there at all times. If you can create it to where the times they're most vulnerable, daylight hours, they're on that property, then you control their destiny. But yeah, it's just not feasible, right? There is a lot of luck involved in those cases to get those deer to 4 or 5 years old.
Definitely.
So, I say that because I don't want people to get frustrated. They're like, man, all my deer get shot. And it's like, well, you got 40 acres. Like, that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a chance that it gets through, but there's also, that's probably most of the people I talk to that, are only killing 2 and 3 year olds is like, that's what they're going to get to because it's a 40 acre chunk and it gets hunted hard.
Yeah.
And
well, there's a reality to like your location and the size of the property that you have to hunt. And if the pressure is such and all those other variables we mentioned is just that it can't produce that age class of deer, then that's the reality. So, and you have a decision to make there is, okay, do I just shoot what the area can give me and be happy with that? That's one. Or you can do something different. You can sell that place or go get permission, buy somewhere else. That's what, frankly, and we've made some progress here in Ohio, but there was a time not long ago where I was pretty depressed. That's why we bought a farm in Illinois. I was just like, dude, I don't know, I just can't produce the kind of deer here that I want. And we've kept it going enough. It's like I couldn't just not do the work on the Ohio farm because it's our farm. I own it. My parents own it, and I can't justify not trying to make it better. And it has improved, and so I've gotten kind of some second wind with that. But in the meantime, is hey, in essence, I was like, well, I got to go where the ones that I want to grow and be able to hunt are. So I got other permission in Ohio, and we went and bought a farm in Illinois, and we I started drawing for tags in Iowa.
Create opportunities.
Started to create those opportunities elsewhere, and that alleviated probably some pressure in Ohio, and that's maybe a part of why.
Very possible.
That was my version of not hunting the property.
There's options. None of them are great. Like even if I look at like my Pennsylvania hunting, like I've got 28 acres behind my house, which Emily and the kids will hunt. Chance a 4 or 5 year old shows up there? Maybe. It's low. I've had one maybe every year passing through, but to hunt them is low. So I've got 6 cameras on the mountain looking for a mature deer in the mountain, and I might see 3 deer all season on the mountain, but if he's one of the 3, that's what I'm looking for.
In an area like your house, though, because of the food available in the area, I really want to believe that if you had a food source that was sustaining into December or whatever, you could kill a good one every year.
Oh, I agree. It's just, hard.
Can you plant enough food? Yeah,
and as of right now, no. Hell, my food plot. Well, we again 2nd year in a row we hit a drought and they just destroyed it. Before we even got to the season. I've got winter rye in there now, which will
help.
It'll help.
Can you imagine? In an area like, this is maybe a super basic, maybe not perfectly correct way of saying it, but if you were in the big woods and you had the ability to clear a 10-acre field and you just planted a soybean field in the middle of it and fenced it off until
I kind of feel that way about my other 2 properties.
You would kill a big giant.
You haven't seen them
deer every
necessarily,
year.
but my Kentucky place is 15 acres of food on a ridge surrounded by either cattle pasture or thousands of acres of timber.
That's what I'm saying.
But again, the deer density is not there. Now, whether the deer just haven't moved in and found it, like last year wasn't real stressful, so they didn't really need food, and we had another bumper acorn crop year.
Yep.
This year, red oaks are dropping early, so at some point, I think they'll need food, and I should have it. Ohio, they mow my food.
Well, I thought what Grant was saying about those bucks being tied to certain areas maybe has a factor there too. Like, and maybe we didn't nail this down, but it's like, even if a buck finds or like comes across that, it's like, is he going to leave at 4, 5, 6 years old? Is he going to leave his area that he survived in that long to go to that food source? Like, and live there? Like
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
I think, that's where you kind of start to see it more. It takes time. Is like you have the deer that you have, basically,
You've got to build that herd over generations.
and you build it over time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, that's like some of the encouraging things. Ohio is different because I think they just move a lot. But like in Kentucky, the deer I saw last year as 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds, all but one made it through. And so it's
Super
like,
encouraging.
Yeah, so of the whatever $7, 6 of them that I know of made it through.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm enjoying that this year too. To just be like I got all these 3-year-olds and all these 2-year-olds, and I'm like, I knew that deer from last year, and I'm like, okay, we're building a deal herd
every
here.
year you're gonna lose some out the bottom, right? I mean, like whatever, it's 10 to 30%, but every year you're a step closer, and eventually you've got 2 or 3 5-year-olds, and you're like, there they are, and at that point you should have a group of 2 and 3 and 4, so it's really where do you step in to make the difference? Like I think same with Grant, same with yours, same with mine. It's like wherever you step in, that's the first group starting to come up. But what you have behind it is you filled the bucket, right? So maybe there's only 1 or 2 in the bucket, but behind it is 4, and then behind that is 6. Like you're going to lose some, but you're going to continue to fill the bucket unless you have like an EHD year or something that is a massive impact. But other than that, you should, once you get to that pinnacle, like this year I have a 5-year-old, and then I might have a gap. Like I don't really know if I have any 4-year-olds, but I've got 3 or 4 really nice 3-year-olds. So like next year, if I kill that 5-year-old, like maybe I only have 4-year-olds, but the following year I'm set up to have multiple big 5-year-olds.
Yeah, it's interesting how sometimes it seems like there's gaps. So yeah, I don't know. Like I'm just thinking, yeah, I don't know, man. Them big ones are,
And I'm not saying that deer won't show up like during, like that
They
last
do.
week of
That's what I'm
October.
saying.
They will.
Yeah.
But I think all that is expansion of the range more than it is like they still spend the majority of their time here. They're vulnerable when they make those expansions.
Maybe not an expansion. It may have something to do with like your camera placement, our camera placement.
Very possible.
Because you're gonna get pictures of 2 and 3-year-olds pretty frequently on like not your basic spots, like on food sources, on transitions and stuff. And maybe you're getting a nice 4 or 5, 6-year-old buck there, even on a huntable pattern. I mean, that's how we kill them. I think that those age classes of bucks though move into and solidify more. And so if you're not, you're not going to get them on that camera. That's where that 5-year-old buck lives. So
even if he moves in right before Halloween, like he's doing that with purpose.
Yeah.
Did it last year. He's doing it again this year. That's his area.
Well, that was kind of my question to Grant, and I don't know that we got an exact answer or if there is one, but like what will socially, what will a buck accept or tolerate in terms of other bucks in that age class, being there? How much area do they need to occupy? I don't know.
I think it depends on the landscape. Like if you're talking about like where Grant's at or even where some of my properties are, it's like, yeah, I mean, easily could have multiple bucks, but I bet they stay very separated. Like if I go to a spot, there's a 5-year-old there, not multiple 5-year-olds. But like if in Illinois, we'd sit in the same spot and 5 different 5-year-olds come by it.
Right. And why is that?
I think that's because of cover and area.
Maybe just their whole life. There's less cover in general. Maybe they're just more willing to tolerate each other.
I mean, think about what we talked about on the Hunt Companion. You're like, listen, if there's a 10-acre block of woods, there's deer in it. Well, because they don't have anywhere else to be. In my area, it's like there could be a 10-acre block of woods. It's void of life. There is no deer in that. It's just because of the cover and space and where they're at. And yeah, I think it's just it much like a hunting side, it's opportunity. What do they have opportunity wise to bed up and feel secure? It's less in ag country than it is in big woods to a point.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can definitely have more bigger, older deer if the more habitat you create. Like what he's saying is, how many can you sustain? I'm not saying go clear cut your woods, but I mean, them clear cuts and running fire through stuff and more, native grass and stuff. That
the thicker it is,
the better.
Yeah, and the more browse you have, everything.
And if you have
stacked.
the food sources to sustain them too, I mean, that's the main thing.
Yep. So
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but pretty cool. Glad to have Grant on, and anxious to kind of see what shows up on Growing Deer this year. And yeah, I mean, check it out. Still, I think YouTube's probably the easiest way to find most of the stuff on that. So we appreciate Grant coming on for episode 209, and we'll catch y'all next week.
Later.
Take me